America hears O.J.'s rage.
Newly released 911 police emergency tapes appear to portray a chilling side of O.J. Simpson's personality. On the tapes, what sounds like a raging Simpson is heard threatening his ex-wife. Sandra Hughes has more on the Simpson investigation and these audio tapes.
The latest 911 tapes reveal more about the turbulent relationship between Nicole and O.J. Simpson. In October of 1993,
it was here where 911 tape recordings revealed that O.J. had broken down a back entrance door and harassed Nicole. We are told there may be more recordings. But late today, following a meeting between the police chief and district attorney, it was determined that no more recordings or transcripts will be made available to the media.
The newly released 911 police emergency tapes that appear to portray a chilling side of O.J. Simpson's personality have law enforcement taking a closer look at how domestic violence cases are handled.
26-year-old Victoria Herring cried as she told me how her husband beat her Monday night because he was jealous. According to a Gwinnett County police report, Alcaviz Herring had Victoria in a headlock and dragged her to his car. Herring then threatened Victoria, saying she would become another Nicole Simpson, and kept telling her he would kill her.
That's when all my facial injuries occurred, my broken arm.
Victoria was 2 months pregnant. She lost the baby after the beating.
This battered woman sees her life paralleling Nicole Simpson's. Many batterers are probably telling their wives, see, it can happen to you, too. Jack Harper, News Center 5.
It began as a storybook romance.
Nicole, this is it. We're each other's destiny.
It became a broken marriage.
I'm in a divorce, Georgia.
And now it's a murder mystery.
I didn't kill anyone.
The O.J. Simpson story, world premiere Tuesday at 8, 7 Central.
On Tuesday, January 31st, 1995, opening arguments concluded in O.J. Simpson's criminal trial. That night, Fox premiered The O.J. Simpson Story, a made-for-TV movie which combined rumor, speculation, and innuendo. The Baltimore Sun's review of the film said, "The O.J. Simpson story makes the Amy Fisher story look like a Hallmark Hall of Fame presentation." One of the events depicted in the movie is Nicole Brown Simpson's October 1993 calls to 911. In Fox's version, the 911 call occurs the night that Mr. Simpson sees his ex-wife and Keith Zlomzowicz being romantic in Mrs. Simpson's living room. Complete fiction.
911 emergency.
Hello. Can you send someone over here right away, please?
What's the emergency?
My ex-husband just broke in and now he's...
Okay, what's his name?
O.J. Simpson.
Is he the sportscaster?
Yes, that's right.
Has he threatened you?
I think you know his record.
What are you doing there, Nicole? You calling 911?
Okay, wait. I'm sending police.
Context of White Supremacy. Gus T. Renegade in for another broadcast, hopefully to share constructive information on the system of white supremacy. Today's date, Thursday, January 21, 2021. So I have been told, new president and everything, brand new, same Rona. This is our book club study session number 9. Jeffrey Toobin, Zoom bomber of 2020. The run of his life, the people versus O.J. Simpson. We are picking up on the chapter, a dirty, filthy word. I said last week, the trial started in the book last week, so every session from here to the verdict will be something probably constructive. Lots of drama from here to the trial lasted 10 months. It was drama pretty much every day. So there will be lots of juicy tidbits to cover from now until the conclusion of the book. So this week there are 2 main points. The first one is why we started with the audio that we did. The 1993 911 call that Nicole Brown Simpson made. You can check out Brian Heiss, his YouTube page. He has a lot of research on the O.J. Simpson criminal and civil trial, actually. I reached out to him to see if we could get him as a guest on the program. He totally ignored Gus T, as usual. Everyone hates the cows and Gus T. But at any rate, He has a great report on YouTube about the 1993 911 call, and you heard a little bit of it. He gives some of the background information in terms of the general atmosphere around domestic violence and the presumption of Mr. Simpson's guilt. You heard the different domestic violence calls. I'll pause right there. First time, last time. But you heard the different domestic violence calls where other people in domestic violence disputes are now referencing O.J. Simpson and telling, an abused female, you're going to end up like Nicole. I'll do you just like O.J. did Nicole. Like, why? And this is happening like days after the murder. No presumption of innocence. This is how we're going into the trial with people with this sort of mentality and how they're thinking about the case and Mr. Simpson. Then we get to the 911 call. That's aired in the media. These tapes are playing days after the murders, so this greatly shifts a lot of public opinion against Mr. Simpson that, oh yeah, he did it. Certainly any sort of physical abuse is horrendous, not acceptable in any way, shape, or form, but that is very different from, did he physically abuse Nicole Brown Simpson? Did he kill Nicole Brown Simpson and Ronald Goldman? Those are two very different things. Next, within that 911 tape, you can go to Mr. Heiss's website and you can hear exactly what they're talking about, which is so critically important. One, you'll hear the 911 operator who does testify in the trial ask her, have you been hit? Do you need medical assistance? She says no. That's important. We can't, or at least in my view, now are we going to call this an incident of battery when he didn't touch her? I mean, we can talk about emotional abuse and verbal abuse. All that is very legitimate. Absolutely. But then it would be, well, what was he saying in the recording? What was he yelling about exactly? Now, some of that audio is not intelligible. You can't really hear it. You can hear her, but he's kind of but he's not standing right next to her, which is important. He's not standing right next to her, which would mean it's not some hulking former football gridiron star over a petite white woman and threatening to pummel her to death. That's not exactly what's happening on the call. In fact, it seems like he is voicing some displeasure about this Keith fella and saying, hey, I think this guy is into drugs. I think this guy sells drugs. Why are you having this guy around our children? And that's exactly what he testified to in the civil trial, and saying that I was upset. I didn't think this guy should have been around our children. You're engaged in sexual intercourse around these children. Why are you even having these people around our children? Having females that are connected with Heidi Fleiss. She's known as some sort of madam, I guess they call it, sex worker, prostitute, someone who offers sexual services to really wealthy whites in the California, Hollywood area. But these are some of the things that you can hear O.J. Simpson talking about in that 911 call, and not liking the fact that Nicole Brown Simpson has his children, Justin and Sydney, exposed to these type of people. That is very different than O.J. Simpson coming in and, oh, I'll kill you, and what are you doing, you slut, you whore. That is very different. But again, you can listen to that 911 call for yourself. Also included in that segment that we started with, the Fox made-for-television, Fox, man, Rupert Murdoch putting in work for a number of years. The O.J. Simpson story, which actually was supposed to air in September of 1994. I don't even think they had completed jury selection at the time that they originally hoped to air the case. But they delayed. I think they had some intervention from the O.J. Simpson defense team. They waited until the conclusion of opening arguments in January 1995 to then play the O.J. Simpson story, where he is castigated as a brute, savage. In fact, if you've seen The Color Purple with good old Danny Glover, Whoopi Goldberg, that is about the O.J. Simpson that you see. What? And smacking her around left and right. That's the O.J. Simpson. So, and has millions of views. If you would like to check it out, it is on YouTube in its entirety. I did watch it. Whew, man, oh man. The man not, the black brute. We will get started. There will be lots of background information today. We'll hear a little bit from the FX series. We will get the trial, the N-word. Oh, my goodness. Extraordinary moments in the trial this week. So excited to get started. The context of white supremacy. Jeffrey Toobin, the run of his life. Audio segment 1.
Chapter 15. A dirty, filthy word. The voice of a victim from beyond the grave, lawyers always say, never loses its emotional power. Nicole calling 911 on October 25th, 1993. He's back, please. He's O.J. Simpson. I think you know his record. Could you just send somebody over here? Weeping. Could you please send somebody over here? When Darden played the tape for the jury, the courtroom went absolutely still. Most people who listened to it on that day, including several jurors, had heard portions of the tape at one time or another. So many of Nicole's words had a familiar sound to them. Yet the playing of the tape in its entirety gave it a fresh meaning and horror. Nicole could not have feigned the terror in her voice, the trembling, the weeping, as she alternated between beseeching the dispatcher and pacifying her ex-husband. "Okay, just stay on the line," the dispatcher said. "I don't want to stay on the line. He's going to beat the shit out of me," Nicole said. Then she drew a long breath to try to calm herself. There was a simple barometer of Simpson's reaction to testimony during his trial. The more it hurt, the more he talked. During innocuous testimony, O.J. would sit quietly, doodling or listening in a casual way. But incriminating testimony set him to responding, although he only had Shapiro to his left and Cochran to his right to lobby. Though ultimately unpersuasive to the jury, the domestic violence evidence particularly set Simpson off. It hit him in the ego, and he played his favorite themes in response. But she wanted to get back together with me. The back door to Nicole's house on Gretna Green, which Simpson damaged during his October 1993 tirade, was already broken. Simpson yammered through almost the entire playing of the tape. Cochran nodded vacantly at his client. Shapiro winced and tried to ignore him. O.J., oblivious to either reaction, talked on. It was almost impossible to make out most of what O.J. was saying on the tape, but his voice conveyed astonishing rage, in both the intensity of his tirade and its duration. For the full 13.5 minutes of the telephone call, Simpson's screaming just went on and on, with no diminishment of fury. Nicole pleaded, "O.J., the kids! O.J., the kids are sleeping!" O.J.'s response was one of the few times his words could be made out clearly. "You didn't give a shit about the kids when you was sucking his dick in the living room. They were here. Didn't care about the kids then." The dispatcher jumped in. "Is he upset with something that you did?" "A long time ago," Nicole sighed. "It always comes back." The reference was to Nicole's encounter with Keith Zlomzovich in 1992, which O.J. had observed from his stalking post outside her front windows. "Nicole, could you just please, O.J., could you please leave? Please leave. Please leave. I'm leaving with my 2 fists is when I'm leaving." For all the power of the tape, the next 2 witnesses demonstrated the limits of Darden's domestic violence presentation. Carl Colby and Catherine Bowe, husband and wife, had lived next door to Nicole on Gretna Green. They testified that they sometimes saw Simpson standing on the sidewalk looking into Nicole's house. But it was all pretty vague, especially because O.J.'s children lived there and their father had a right to visit them. Bowe was especially spacey. At a sidebar conference after Darden said, chuckling, "You just never really know what you're going to get from Mrs. Colby," Cochran chimed in, "She is an alien from another planet." At one point, when Bowe began an exegesis on which varieties of trees around her house shed berries, and why O.J. might not have wanted to park his white car beneath them, Darden had to turn his face away from the jury box because he was laughing so hard. Denise Brown was supposed to be different. She had extensive first-hand exposure to O.J. and Nicole's relationship, including its darker sides. Since the moment Detective Tom Lang called her parents' home on the morning after the murders, Denise was convinced that O.J. had murdered her sister. If anyone could explain how this had happened, it would be Nicole's older sister. When Denise walked to the witness stand on Friday afternoon, February 3rd, she did not so much as glance at her former brother-in-law. The four Brown sisters all looked and sounded alike, and they reflected the values of their moneyed Orange County upbringing. All four had breast implants, but not one had a college degree. The two oldest sisters, Denise and Nicole, the brunette and the blonde, came closest to embodying a certain California ideal. Lithe, athletic, out for a good time, each a homecoming princess at Dana Point High School. Denise graduated in 1975 and became briefly a New York model. Nicole graduated on May 20th, 1977, and met O.J. Simpson 3 weeks later. Denise circulated on the periphery of Nicole's life for many years, alternately competitive and supportive, combative and loving. She dated many of Simpson's friends, including Al Cowlings, boutique owner Alan Austin, and advertising executive Ed McCabe. Married briefly in 1984, Denise had a child with another man several years later. In 1994, she and her son were living in her parents' home. The month before Nicole's murder, Denise spent 8 days, from May 9th to May 17th, 1994, as an inmate in the Huntington Beach jail, after pleading guilty for the second time to drunk driving charges. She had pleaded guilty to the same crime in 1992, but was not sentenced to jail. Though still beautiful, Denise Brown had an unmistakable hard edge. Taking the stand in a black pantsuit and a large gold cross, she obviously wanted this jury to convict. "Miss Brown," Darden began, "you are Nicole Brown's older sister?" "Yes." "Do you have other sisters?" "Yes." "How many?" "There's Dominique and Tanya and, of course, Nicole." Darden began by asking when Denise first met the defendant. She said that Nicole had invited her to travel to Buffalo in 1977 to see a Bills game with her. She said that at the game, a friend of O.J.'s was there. He came over and said hello to us, and Nicole said hello, kissed him on both cheeks. Darden asked if anything unusual then happened. "Yeah," Denise said. "O.J. got real upset, and he started screaming at Nicole." This was less than 5 minutes into her testimony, and it brought both Shapiro and Cochran flying out of their seats to object. When the lawyers approached Ito at the sidebar, Ito wondered what was going on. "Mr. Darden," the judge said, "I thought we were just going to do a few more foundational things, not incidents, and my ruling on domestic violence doesn't include anything in this area. What are we doing here?" "I'm not about to allege or solicit any testimony that the defendant beat Nicole in 1977, Your Honor," Darden said. "I'm just trying to define and explain the nature of their relationship, how it developed over the years." The judge didn't even have to hear from the defense lawyers to reject Darden's argument. The prosecutor was trying to pile on additional misdeeds by O.J. in front of the jury without having allowed the judge to rule on them first. Of course, the defense lawyers were wise to this game as soon as Darden started playing it, and Ito shut him down immediately. It was an amateurish mistake by Darden, and a bad strategy to boot, putting Denise on the stand and immediately eliciting tales of O.J.'s misbehavior from her. Properly prepared, Denise could have given the jury some real understanding of Nicole and O.J.'s relationship, the good times as well as the bad. She could have helped explain why Nicole was so attracted to O.J., indeed, why she loved him so much, and why she stayed with him even though he abused her. An honest summary of their relationship would have given Denise that much more credibility when she started describing O.J.'s bad acts. Instead, Darden tried to present O.J. as simply a domestic violence machine, which was untrue, and in any event unlikely to be believed by a jury already sympathetic to him. Darden walked back to the podium, still miffed at Ito's ruling, and said to the witness, "Miss Brown, we're not going to talk about anything that occurred between 1977 and December 31st, 1984. You understand that? In other words, no context." Darden would just head straight to the first of the domestic violence incidents. With just a question or two of introduction, Denise recalled a scene in 1987 at the Red Onion restaurant in Santa Ana. At one point, Denise said, O.J. grabbed Nicole's crotch and said, "This is where babies come from, and this belongs to me." And Nicole just sort of wrote it off as if it was nothing, like, like she was used to that kind of treatment. And he was like, "I thought it was really humiliating, if you ask me." It was obvious that Denise was trying her best to bury O.J., volunteering the additional and inadmissible details that Nicole was used to this treatment, and that Denise found it humiliating. Cochran understood what was going on. Back at the sidebar, Cochran implored Ito, "Now, we may look back on this and smile when the jury verdict comes in May or June, but for right now, we can't allow this to take place. I just don't think it's right." Ito invited Darden's response. "Your Honor," said the prosecutor, "I don't know what Mr. Cochran means by we can't allow. Is he wearing the robe in this courtroom today?" Cochran so flummoxed Darden that the prosecutor thought he could use personal attack in lieu of legal argument. Cochran responded as if he were speaking to a child. "I said we can't allow this without objection. That's all I said, counsel." Again, Ito directed Darden to take better control of his witness. Once more, with barely any introduction, Darden moved on to another domestic violence incident, a fight between O.J. and Nicole at the Rockingham house sometime in the mid-1980s. It started, Denise said, when she told O.J. he took Nicole for granted. Why did you tell him that? Shapiro objected, and Ito sustained it for the obvious reason. Why this witness thinks that Miss Brown Simpson was taken for granted is not relevant. Darden asked what happened next. He started yelling at me. "I don't take her for granted. I do everything for her. I give her everything." And he continued, and then a whole fight broke out, and pictures started flying off the walls, clothes started flying. Denise seemed on the verge of tears at this point. He ran upstairs, got clothes, started flying down the stairs, and grabbed Nicole, told her to get out of his house, wanted us all out of his house, picked her up, threw her against the wall, picked her up, threw her out of the house. She ended up falling. She ended up on her elbows and on her butt. We were all sitting there screaming and crying, and then he grabbed me and threw me out of the house. "Are you okay, Miss Brown?" Darden asked. "Yeah," said Denise, pausing between tears. "It's just so hard. I'll be fine." Darden turned to the judge. "Your Honor, if it pleases the court, can we adjourn and continue this Monday morning?" It is classic courtroom strategy to end with a dramatic moment on Friday afternoon, something for the jury to think about all weekend, and Darden had chosen this closing with care. As usual, however, Cochran was about 3 steps in front of him. In a heated sidebar conference before they broke for the weekend, Cochran lectured Darden for staging Denise's crying stunt at the end of a Friday. "They're not fooling anybody with this stuff," Cochran said. "I mean, I'm telling them it's going to backfire on them. They keep doing it, and it's not right." Darden protested his innocence. "Mr. Cochran," he lectured his counterpart, "how else do you expect her to react, especially given these circumstances? Given her relationship to the defendant, given how long she's known him, she is grieving, Mr. Cochran. It happens when people lose their loved ones, and I can't control that. I can't stop that. I didn't wield the knife. I didn't kill her. Frankly, I'm touched by it. I feel bad about it. Maybe I'm a little slow to stop her, but I will attempt to do better. I will say, however, that Mr. Cochran has been my mentor for years, and I've learned—" His mentor cut him off. "Well, he's going to see what effect it has on the jury," Cochran said. "I don't think it's going to have the effect you think you were having." Cochran was going with the focus groups and his gut. "Watch them," the defense lawyer urged. "See if they're manipulated or not. You guys keep trying this and see how it ends up. I'll remind you about it." Cochran was right. Several jurors said after the trial that they were offended by Denise's obvious bias and had discounted much of what she had to say. Monday morning started with another Darden fiasco. Shortly after he started examining Denise Brown again, Darden placed a photograph of a battered Nicole on the courtroom overhead projector, which was known throughout the trial by its brand name, the Elmo. The prosecution had already shown the photographs taken by the police following the incident on January 1st, 1989. This one showed similar but not identical bruises. Denise said she had seen this photograph in Nicole's bathroom drawer. "Did you and she discuss the photograph?" Darden asked. "Yes, we did." "What did she tell you about the photograph?" "Objection," said Shapiro. "Hearsay, Your Honor." Ito called the parties to the sidebar. Darden's question quite obviously did call for hearsay evidence in response, but that was not the worst of it. The judge asked Darden which incident of domestic violence this photograph involved. "I don't know what the incident is that relates directly to this photograph," Darden said. Ito sighed, asked the jury to return to the jury room, and demanded that Darden explain how this photograph might be admissible. Darden said only that it had been found in Nicole's safe deposit box after her death, with the photographs from the 1989 beating. "Counsel," Ito said with mounting impatience, "you can't just show horrible photographs without tying it to something relevant to this case." For once, the defense histrionics that followed were justified. "I have been practicing for a long time," said Shapiro, "and I have never seen anything quite this extraordinary, where a photograph that is clearly inadmissible is just thrown up on a giant screen television for the jury to see." In legal terms, Darden had failed to establish the photograph's foundation, that is, the time and place it was taken, along with the relevant surrounding circumstances. By showing the photograph to the jurors, Darden obviously intended for them to draw the inference that O.J. had caused the wounds, but he had no way of proving it. In shorter, less publicized cases, this is the kind of error that results in convictions being overturned on appeal. As Ito put it, with characteristic restraint, "What concerns me is the rather inflammatory nature of that photograph, and to show it to the jury without any foundation for it is more than inappropriate." Ito levied less of a sanction than some judges might have. He simply instructed the jury to disregard the photograph and asked Darden to move on. From there, Darden wrapped it up with Denise pretty quickly. He brought out that O.J. had called Nicole a fat pig when she was pregnant. Loathsome behavior, to be sure, but not exactly wife-beating either. She concluded her testimony with a description of O.J.'s behavior at Sidney's dance recital in the early evening of June 12, 1994. Darden asked about O.J.'s demeanor that night. Said Denise. "He had a very bizarre look in his eyes. It was a very far-away look. It wasn't like O.J., just walking into a place and being, hey, here I am, kind of sure of himself type of attitude. It was more of a glazed-over, kind of frightening dark eyes. It just didn't look like the O.J. that we knew." Perhaps Denise really did see O.J. this way, but Cochran had these jurors pegged. Unmoved by her tears, they regarded Denise with cold, hard stares. Denise Brown's testimony essentially closed the domestic violence part of the prosecution's case. To a jury predisposed to believe such evidence, or one inclined toward hostility for the defendant, the presentation might have had considerable impact. After all, O.J. had been convicted of beating his wife. and there had been a handful more of incidents of violence, at least according to her sister. The 911 tape from 1993 suggested that O.J. was certainly capable, at least, of violent anger toward his wife. And the stalking evidence, even if ambiguous, suggested a continuing obsession on his part. Overall, however, the domestic violence evidence was just short enough of overwhelming that the defense could continue to ignore it. Shapiro, for example, barely cross-examined Denise Brown. Cochran's mantra from his opening, "This is a murder case, not a domestic violence case," remained the core of the defense strategy. So the prosecution at this point set out to prove its murder case. Marcia Clark called a series of witnesses who had testified at the preliminary hearing. The waiters at Mezzaluna who had served Nicole and her family on June 12th. The bartender who took the call from Juditha Brown at about 9:40 p.m. and then ran out to the sidewalk to locate her dropped glasses. The dog walkers who tended to Nicole's bereaved Akita and then located the bodies. The defense lawyers mostly gave these early witnesses a pass, until the police officers started taking the stand. Cochran's entire demeanor changed when he rose to cross-examine Robert Risk. A uniformed patrol officer, Risk had been the first member of the LAPD on the crime scene at Bundy, arriving at 12:13 a.m. on June 13th. Under Clark's questioning, Risk had testified about being directed to the bodies by Sukru Bostepi and his wife Bettina Rasmussen. Risk had actually done very little. After briefly inspecting the bodies, he had walked through the house, collected Justin and Sidney from their upstairs bedrooms, and called for reinforcements. Racial antennae were high even during this innocuous testimony. Risk mentioned that a sergeant named Kuhn arrived on the scene, prompting Clark to ask, "That Sergeant Kuhn, is he any relation to another one?" As this jury surely knew, Stacy Kuhn was one of the officers who had beaten Rodney King. There was no relation. Two themes stood out in Cochran's cross-examination. First, he asked any number of questions about the cup of Ben & Jerry's ice cream that Risk had discovered on a back stairway. Risk had said the dessert was melting, not melted. To Cochran's way of thinking, that meant that the time of the murder must have been at 11 o'clock p.m., or even later. Otherwise, the ice cream would have been completely melted. What kind of ice cream was it? Did you take any pictures of it? Where exactly did you find this ice cream? Why didn't you photograph the ice cream, preserve it, analyze it? Incredibly, Cochran spent several hours on this trivia with Risk and the officers who followed him. The other theme was the coroner, who had not arrived on the scene to remove the bodies until 9:10 a.m. Again, according to Cochran's suggestions to the jury, if the coroner had arrived on the scene earlier, he might have been able to pinpoint the time of death. Many more hours of cross-examination were devoted to this subject as well. These two subjects had another common thread. As defense arguments, they were absurd. The police had no way of knowing for sure how melted the ice cream was when it was first placed by the stairs, presumably by Nicole. Thus, examining or photographing the ice cream later would have yielded no relevant information. Likewise, even if the coroner's representatives had come to the murder scene within minutes of Risk's arrival, they could not have made a relevant finding on the time of death. The prosecution asserted that the murder took place starting at about 10:15 p.m. The defense claimed 10:35 p.m. or later. Forensic pathology is simply not capable of narrowing down with such precision a time of death. However, these arguments over the ice cream and the coroner still served Cochran's purposes. As the questions were raised over and over again to Risk, to his boss, Sergeant David Rossi, then to Detectives Ron Phillips and Tom Lang, Cochran put the officers on the defensive. By sheer force of repetition, Cochran made it sound like there had been some major police lapse at the crime scene. The focus thus shifted from O.J. Simpson to the deficiencies of the LAPD. Cochran spent 4 days cross-examining Lang, the co-lead detective with his partner Van Adder. Lang would not be riled. In fact, sometimes it seemed the detective was having trouble staying awake. Bald, with a bushy mustache that seemed to camouflage any change in expression, Lang met each of Cochran's sallies with a phlegmatic reply. No, he didn't call the coroner right away. No, he didn't preserve the ice cream. In some respects, Cochran broke the rules of cross-examination. He didn't ask closed-ended questions, that is, questions that can be answered only yes or no. Cochran's attention wandered, and he let his witness wander too. But what Cochran did very effectively was tell stories. The answers to his questions almost didn't matter. Cochran was talking to the jury. Telling a story is precisely what Cochran was doing when, early in the cross-examination of Lang, he asked about the detective's arrival at the murder scene. "And then you drove from your home in Simi Valley down to the location. Is that right?" "Yes." "And how long did it take you to get from Simi Valley to the location in Brentwood?" "Perhaps 50 minutes." The incantation of the fact that Lang lived in Simi Valley was anything but accidental. The place, even just the words Simi Valley, was anathema to black and many white Angelenos because it was the site of the notorious acquittal on state charges of the police officers who beat Rodney King. Overwhelmingly white, highly conservative, and not coincidentally the home of many Los Angeles police officers, Simi Valley had a reputation as the paradigmatic, racist Southern California community. Cochran wanted the jury to know that Lang lived there. The reference had actually been long planned. Bill Pavlik, the ex-LAPD renegade working for the defense team, had run the detectives' names through several directories and never learned where they lived. But one time when Pavlik and the detectives were standing around during a search at Simpson's property, Pavlik decided to make conversation with Lang. It was all very casual. "Did you get much damage in the earthquake?" Pavlik asked. "Not too bad," said Lang. "Oh, where do you live?" "Simi Valley." Knowing he could use it, Pavlik filed the information away, and eventually he passed it along to Cochran. During the cross-examination, shortly after the first 2 references to Lang's home in Simi Valley, Cochran asked another question about some evidence the detective had found at Simpson's home. "You took those shoes home to Simi Valley with you?" "That is correct," Lang said. Cochran used the early part of his cross-examination of Lang to expand on his theme of Nicole as sexual predator. He asked pointedly if Lang had requested that Nicole's body be tested with a rape kit. Since there was no evidence that she had been sexually assaulted, no removal of her clothing, for example, the only purpose of such a test would be to see if she had recently had intercourse. Cochran dwelled lovingly on the number of candles burning in the house when Lang arrived. In the living room? Yes. In the bedroom? Even in the bathroom? Yes. And of course, the large bathtub was full of water. "So, would you say there were at least 9 candles altogether burning at this point?" "Yes." "There was even music playing." "What kind of music did you hear?" Cochran asked. "It seemed to me to be new wave-type music, instrumentals," Lang said, apparently searching for the term New Age. Cochran asked, "Kind of soft, romantic kind of thing?" Lang said he couldn't be sure, but the answer to a question like that one doesn't matter. Cochran interspersed a series of questions about frequent visitors to Nicole's home, pointing out that Marcus Allen, the football star, seemed to be among the regular guests. He let linger the issue of what Allen was doing with Nicole. "Did you know whether or not Miss Nicole Brown Simpson had a visitor that evening after 10 o'clock, a male visitor? Do you know that?" Ito overruled an objection and let Lang answer. "The only male visitor I'm aware of is the other victim." As if the point could be missed, Cochran followed up with, "But in your investigative capacity, you decided not to order this rape kit, which you could have ordered. Isn't that correct, sir?" It was correct, and Cochran wasn't asking about rape. It was as if he had heard every argument made by Don Vinson, the prosecution's ignored jury consultant. The questions reinforced the jury's picture of Nicole as a slut who pursued men in general and craved black men in particular. Chris Darden suffered as he watched Cochran push these buttons, and he took out his frustration in a particularly inappropriate way. On the night of February 22nd, the first day of Lange's cross-examination, Darden was working in his office when he saw the daily discussion of the trial on Rivera Live, on the CNBC cable network. Darden called into the station to add his own analysis, although implausibly he later asserted that he did not know his comments were being broadcast. Speaking with Geraldo Rivera, Darden laid into Lange's performance as a witness. "I would like the officers to be a bit more aggressive," Darden said. "They are answering the questions being put to them, and I think some of the questions, are a bit ridiculous, and I wish that they would point that out to the jury on occasion." Speaking of Cochran, Darden added, "I am sure he is scoring some points." Darden's ill-advised phone call did nothing but make trouble for him. For starters, it was unseemly for a prosecutor in the middle of a murder trial to shoot the breeze with a talk show personality. That alone violated the DA's office policy. More important, Darden was publicly criticizing an ostensible ally, Lange, and implicitly chastising all of the officers who had testified. On Thursday morning, February 23rd, Darden's colleagues made it clear to him that he should cease his role as a TV trial analyst. Lange and Van Adder, who stewed throughout the trial about a perceived lack of support from Clark and Darden, were furious. Cochran sensed this prickly atmosphere and sought to exploit it. His suggestions on his second day of cross-examining Lange were even more outlandish, especially when he returned to his favorite project, dirtying up Nicole. "Now," Cochran began, "during the course of your investigation, do you know who Faye Resnick is?" "Yes." "And how did you become aware of the name Faye Resnick during the course of your investigation?" "When I learned that Faye Resnick was a friend of victim Nicole Brown Simpson," the detective explained. Cochran wanted his Faye Resnick theory in front of the jury. The idea, which never had any evidence to support it, that the murders had been committed by drug dealers looking for Resnick. To that end, Cochran needed to establish that Resnick had lived with Nicole for a few days in the beginning of June. But Cochran did not want to call Resnick as a defense witness. She loathed Simpson, thought he was guilty, and asserted that O.J. had told her he wanted to kill Nicole. Under the rules of evidence, Cochran couldn't call her as a witness to tell some things, that she had moved in with Nicole, but not others, that O.J. had told her he wanted to kill Nicole. So Cochran tried to get his desired sliver of the story in through Lange. "Did you learn," Cochran asked Lange, "whether or not Faye Resnick moved in with Nicole Brown Simpson on Friday, June 3rd, 1994? Clark objected. The answer called for hearsay, i.e., what someone had told Lange. Ito sustained it. Cochran tried another tack. "Did you ever ascertain whether or not Miss Nicole Brown Simpson had anyone who lived with her in the month before June 12th, other than the children?" "Yes," said Lange. "Did you find out that Faye Resnick moved in with Nicole Brown Simpson on or about June 3rd, 1994? Clark objected, but this time Ito let Lange answer, and the detective said he had heard that Resnick had moved in on that date. When Cochran asked another question about Resnick, Judge Ito called the lawyers to the sidebar. He posed a question that revealed much about his judicial philosophy, asking Clark if Resnick really had lived with Nicole. "Is this a disputed fact?" As always, Ito cared more about getting accurate information to the jury than about some of the finer points of evidence law. Clark was so angry she could barely speak. "I'm not," Clark sputtered. "I'm not sure when Faye Resnick lived with her, if they ever lived there on any kind of a permanent basis. It doesn't matter whether it is a disputed fact or not. We have all kinds of slop on the record now that has been thrown in front of this jury through counsel's method of cross-examination by saying, 'Have you heard this? Do you know about that?' Clark said Cochran should call a witness who could testify from first-hand knowledge that Resnick lived there." Hearing this, Cochran decided to twit his adversaries. "I can choose the witness that I want," Cochran said. "They obviously haven't tried any cases in a long time, and obviously don't know how, but this is cross-examination." Darden rose to Cochran's taunting, saying in a voice loud enough to be heard across the courtroom, "Who is he talking about? Doesn't know how to try the case?" "Wait, Mr. Darden," Ito instructed. In an effort to keep some semblance of order, the judge had made a rule that only one lawyer per side could speak on any issue. This was Clark's issue, and besides, Darden was just sparring with Cochran. But Darden didn't wait. He couldn't control himself where Cochran was concerned, and he kept on talking against the judge's orders. "Is he the only lawyer that knows how to try the case?" Darden blurted out. Ito was appalled at Darden's direct violation of his order. "I'm going to hold you in contempt," the judge threatened. Darden couldn't stop. "I should be held in contempt. I have sat here and listened to—" "Mr. Darden," Ito continued, "I'm warning you right now. This cross-examination is out of order," Darden shot back. Ito moved from his position by the sidebar back to the bench. Sighing, he excused the jury. The lawyers returned to their respective tables. The brief pause should have broken the tension and given Darden a moment to compose himself. After the jury left, Ito turned to Darden. "Mr. Darden, let me give you a piece of advice. Take about 3 deep breaths, as I am going to do, and then contemplate what you are going to say next. Do you want to take a recess now for a moment?" "I don't require a recess," Darden said. "I will hear your comments at this point. I have cited you. Do you have any response?" "I would like counsel, Your Honor," said Darden. It is not a good sign when a prosecutor feels the need to have his own lawyer in the middle of a murder trial. "You can have counsel," Ito said, coolly. It was so simple. All Ito wanted was an apology. Every trial lawyer knows that judges sometimes act irrationally, rule incorrectly, act impetuously. Here, Ito had arguably made a mistake by letting in hearsay evidence, and Darden had exploded. His job, his obligation as a prosecutor, was to apologize and get on with the case. Gracious and tolerant to a fault, Ito could not have been clearer about what he wanted, saying, "I invite counsel to think very carefully about what they are going to say to the court next." That is an opportunity to get up and say, "Gee, I'm sorry, I lost my head there. I apologize to the court. I apologize to counsel." When I get that response, then we move on. Ito gave Darden a moment to confer with Clark. They stepped aside, and Darden shook his head. When Ito asked what they had decided, Clark said again that Darden wanted a lawyer for the contempt proceeding. Ito gave Darden more time to think it over. Once again, Clark said that Darden wanted to be represented by counsel. He would not apologize. Darden stood alone by the jury box, head down, arms crossed in front of him, agonizing. Ito would be pushed no farther. "I've offered you now 3 times an opportunity to end this right now. This is very simple." More silence. Jerry Spence, the Wyoming attorney, was seated in the press section of the courtroom. He was doing commentary on the trial for CNBC and other television stations. Spence was so frustrated by Darden's intransigence that he slammed a pad down on his thigh and said, "Jesus Christ!" "Mr. Spence, your comments aren't necessary," Ito said. Still, Darden said nothing. Christopher Darden was no fool. He knew he should have learned to ignore Johnnie Cochran, yet Darden's feelings were so intense that he couldn't help himself. In some respects, Darden's family story bore an uncanny resemblance to Cochran's. Both their families had come from the South, and both had arrived on the West Coast as part of the great migration of African Americans drawn by the prospect of work in factories during World War II. The Cochrans came from Louisiana and settled first in Oakland. Chris Darden's father came from outside Tyler, Texas, and settled in Richmond, the city next door to Oakland. While Johnnie Cochran Sr. had found work building troop ships for Bethlehem Steel, Eddie Darden welded submarines for the Navy. Despite these similarities, the two black families were separated by a gap that is no less real for being mostly invisible to white Americans, who tend to regard African Americans as a single, struggling social unit. To be sure, the Cochrans were no aristocrats, and the Dardens no paupers, but still, the difference between them was class. Johnnie Cochran Sr. bolted the blue-collar world as soon as Japan surrendered. His first son came of age with not just a hope, but an expectation that he would surpass the considerable success of his father. Eddie Darden, in contrast, had a blowtorch in his hand until the day he retired, decades later. His son Chris, the third of 8 children, had no family guide in the hunt for entree into the professional world. Richmond itself conferred few advantages. A sleepy community of 21,000 at the outbreak of the war, it became a veritable metropolis of 100,000 within a year. Kaiser, Southern Pacific Railways, and Bethlehem Steel, not to mention the great military shipyards of Port Chicago and Mare Island, inhaled new workers as quickly as they could settle into the flimsy shacks that were being thrown up along treeless streets every day. But unlike Oakland, where black folks eventually gained political power comparable to their numbers, Richmond remained for years under the control of a small white elite. Services were poor. Richmond had no superior court, no county hospital. It was a plantation, according to one of the few prominent black lawyers in Richmond, the Mississippi of the West. In Eddie Darden's case, that racism extended to the workplace as well. He toiled as a civilian employee in the vast naval shipyard at Mare Island, in nearby Vallejo. The better-paying and higher-skilled positions at Mare Island were called journeyman jobs. They were for welders, pipe fitters, sandblasters, and the like. Those jobs went overwhelmingly to whites. For many years, the black workers, like Chris's father, were allowed to work only as helpers, the lower-paid assistants to the journeymen. It was only with the birth of affirmative action practices in the 1960s and 1970s that blacks like Eddie Darden became journeymen in any significant numbers. In addition to raising her 8 children, Chris's mother, Marie, worked in a school cafeteria, another typical dead-end occupation traditionally filled by the African Americans of Richmond. The Dardens had enough money to buy a small 2-story frame house in the working-class south side of Richmond, but there was no money for luxuries, or even such basic necessities as dentist visits for all the children. An absence of early care sentenced Chris to a lifetime of dental miseries. The Darden family did have, however, similar attitudes about education to the Cochrans. Mr. and Mrs. Darden believed that only schools with significant numbers of white children received adequate resources. So those would be the schools for their children. Here the Dardens were fortunate, because John F. Kennedy High School opened within a few blocks of their home, just as their first children were coming of age. A modern building with a pool and several athletic fields, and a fully integrated student body of about 2,000, Kennedy High drew the city's most motivated students, Edna, the oldest Darden child, served as student body president in 1972. Chris's beloved older brother Michael came next and was a standout on the track team, though he later succumbed to a life of drug addiction. Never the favored son like Johnnie Cochran, Chris Darden took his place in the Kennedy High class of '74 with something to prove. A quiet kid, with a temper that heated and cooled quickly, Darden worked hard in school, made a mark as both a student and an athlete, and held down a job in a liquor store besides. His passion was football, where he played wide receiver. He neither wore number 32, nor especially idealized O.J. Simpson. Like most people in Richmond, Darden rooted for the Oakland Raiders. Darden never had much of a chance to shine on the football field because he played behind Robert Spider Gaines, who went on to the University of Washington, where he would win the Most Valuable Player award in the Rose Bowl. More dogged than especially talented, Darden shifted his energies to track, where he ran the quarter mile and served as captain of the cross-country team. A National Honor Society student, he scraped together the money for junior college and then, a year later, for San Jose State. The mid-1970s were a dramatic time to be a young track athlete at San Jose State. In the 1968 Olympic Games in Mexico City, Tommy Smith and John Carlos, who were students at San Jose State, won the gold and bronze medals in the 200-meter dash. During the awards ceremony, the two young men shocked the world by giving Black Power salutes during the playing of the national anthem. Smith and Carlos had left the university by the time Darden arrived, but their fiery spirit still resonated on the track team and indeed among black students there in general. Yet even more than the track team, the formative experience of Darden's college years came from his membership in the Alpha Psi Alpha fraternity. Predominantly black fraternities play an important role in African American life. Denied access to many of the networks that whites take for granted, many black college men form lifelong attachments to these institutions, whose influence stretches well beyond campus walls. It is a far cry from the Animal House model of many white frats, especially at Alpha Psi Alpha, the oldest and most prestigious black fraternity. Martin Luther King Jr. and Thurgood Marshall were members. Alphas at San Jose State had an activist, even militant cast. In a characteristic difference, Johnnie Cochran belonged to the UCLA chapter of Kappa Alpha Psi, which was known as the Playboys, the most social of the black frats. The Alphas didn't even have a building on the San Jose State campus, so they met in classrooms, where they devoted themselves to organizing projects like a tutoring program for kids in the city's poorer neighborhoods. Darden's frat name was Sugar D, because, it is said, he was sweet. He led quietly, more by example than exhortation, but his passionate commitment to his fellow African Americans stood out even in that politicized era. At the stylized interrogation sessions for prospective alphas, Darden always had the same question for pledges. What are you going to do for your people? Even before Chris Darden became famous in the Simpson case, a younger alpha had saved for many years a note that Darden had written to him upon his joining the fraternity. It matters not who you are, where you come from, or how you think. What matters is whatever the hell you do with it. Signed, Sugar D. He quit track suddenly. A history professor in Afro-American studies, Gloria Ali Barujo, had become a mentor to him. Darden later wrote that when he studied the world of his ancestors, my eyes opened like slipped blinds, and all of a sudden my own life was explained to me. Martin Luther King had taught me what was fair. The Black Panther newspapers screamed at me what was unjust. But it was Gloria Ali Barujo who taught me who I was. It was like discovering gravity. It explained the universe to me. So this is why people treat me the way they do. This is why women grab their handbags when I get on an elevator. Ali Barujo sat Darden down and appealed to his growing political consciousness. Speaking both metaphorically and literally, she asked him, "When are you going to stop running in circles?" He did just that, and soon after applied to law school. He took an apartment in Richmond and commuted across the Bay Bridge to Hastings Law School in San Francisco. His passage was anything but smooth. As Darden later admitted, he shoplifted regularly through college, and he fathered a child out of wedlock while a student at Hastings. He graduated in 1980 and took a job with the National Labor Relations Board for $17,000 a year. A few months later, he moved to Los Angeles and the district attorney's office. The money was better, $24,000 a year. And he said at the time, "I want people like me making the decisions." Darden had come farther and overcome more than any of the principal lawyers in the Simpson trial, and probably bore the best intentions as well. He was also different from Cochran, Shapiro, and Marcia Clark in another way. Chris Darden was not, alas, an especially talented trial lawyer. For one thing, Darden had tried relatively few cases. After the customary few years of working minor cases, Darden spent the bulk of his 15 years as a prosecutor in the Special Investigations Division of the District Attorney's Office. Sid has the most politically sensitive duty on the DA's staff, the investigation of public officials, most notably officers in the LAPD. The lawyers at Sid, including Darden, approached their work meticulously. In light of the difficulties of prosecuting the DA's usual ally, the cops, the lawyers in Sid filed charges only in the strongest cases. It was not unusual, for example, that Darden had only one major trial at Sid during his tenure there. As it turned out, though, he was the prosecutor in one of the most notorious episodes in the modern history of the LAPD. The 1988 police raid on apartments at 39th Street and Dalton Avenue. It was supposed to be a rather minor drug bust, but the 80 LAPD officers who went to the scene wreaked havoc that had lasting repercussions. The raid eventually cost the city more than $3 million in civil settlements to the victims, and Darden investigated and prosecuted the 3 top police officials responsible. Chris felt very strongly that we needed to hold the command level responsible, and at that point Daryl Gates got involved. Ira Reiner, who was the district attorney at the time, said later. The police chief wrote Reiner a letter claiming that Darden was pushing too hard, being too aggressive. Anyone else would have laughed it off, Reiner continued, but not Chris. He wanted to fire back a letter. This was a classic case of police misconduct, and of course we went ahead with it. Chris handled it with commitment and emotion. That's just the way he operates. In the case Darden tried, all 3 officers were acquitted. Darden's first important moment in the Simpson trial came shortly before opening statements, when Ito was weighing whether to allow the defense to cross-examine Mark Furman about his prior use of the word nigger. Other prosecutors had conducted the bulk of the legal argument on the issue, but Darden rose on January 13th as a sort of expert witness on the subject. "It is a dirty, filthy word," Darden said. "It is not a word that I allow people to use in my household. I'm sure Mr. Cochran doesn't. And the reason we don't is because it is an extremely derogatory and denigrating term. Because it is so prejudicial and so extremely inflammatory that to use that word in any situation will evoke some type of emotional response from any African American within earshot of that word." Darden said allowing use of the word will do one thing. It will upset the black jurors. It will issue a test, and the test will be, whose side are you on? The side of the white prosecutors and the white policeman, or on the side of the black defendant and his very prominent black lawyer? That is what it is going to do. Either you are with the man, or you are with the brothers. That is what it does. That is exactly what it does. Darden's speech was about evenly divided between text and subtext. In part, he simply meant what he said. Nigger is a uniquely offensive epithet, and Darden thought Ito should exercise caution before he allowed anyone to utter it in court. But Darden's words also reflected his frustration at how the defense had seized the racial high ground in the trial from the beginning. The strategy Shapiro advocated from practically the day Simpson was arrested, which Cochran embellished even beyond the original conception, called for placing race at the center of the defense. That strategy started with Furman and went on to include the focus on race in jury selection, the defense obsession with police misconduct, and the trashing of Nicole. As a prosecutor who had devoted his career to ferreting out genuine police racism, Darden seethed to see O.J. Simpson, who had done precisely nothing for his fellow African Americans over the course of his lifetime, capitalizing on his race. In his frustration, Darden started to ramble. Mr. Cochran and the defense, they have a purpose in going into that area, and the purpose is to inflame the passions of the jury and to ask them to pick sides not on the basis of the evidence in this case, and the evidence in this case against this defendant is overwhelming. He went on, I don't have to educate the court on this point, but we have a right to a fair trial just like the defendant has. We are not running around or talking about or seeking to introduce to the jury the notion that this defendant has a fetish for blonde-haired white women. That would be inappropriate. That would inflame the passions of the jury. It would be outrageous. It was Darden at this point who was outrageous, in floating the white women obsession for the benefit of the television cameras. After nearly 20 minutes of stream-of-consciousness babbling, Darden finally sat down. Johnnie Cochran had planned to leave court early that day, but he remained to respond to Darden's monologue on the N-word. Cochran walked slowly to the podium. Bigger, older, stronger, wiser, Cochran dominated Darden in both physical and intellectual terms. I have a funeral to attend today, and there are few things in life more important than attending the funeral, where you have been asked to speak. But I would be remiss were I not at this time to take this opportunity to respond to my good friend, Mr. Chris Darden. Good friend. That was a tip-off to the assault to come. His remarks this morning are perhaps the most incredible remarks I've heard in a court of law in the 32 years I have been practicing law. His remarks are demeaning to African Americans as a group, and so I want, before I go to this funeral, to apologize to African Americans across this country. Not every African American feels that way. It is demeaning to our jurors to say that African Americans who have lived under oppression for 200+ years in this country cannot work within the mainstream, cannot hear these offensive words. I am ashamed that Mr. Darden would allow himself to become an apologist for this man, Furman. Darden was beside himself. He stood up and walked in a tiny circle behind his chair, as if he were weighing whether to walk out. Finally he sat down and swiveled his chair away from the podium in symbolic, if rather childish, protest. By overstating his own case about the N-word so dramatically, Darden had opened the door for Cochran's righteous indignation. All across America today, believe me, black people are offended at this very moment, Cochran went on. And so I have to say this was uncalled for. It is unwarranted, and most unfortunate for somebody that I have a lot of respect for, and perhaps he has become too emotional about this, which Darden certainly had. When Cochran finally finished his peroration, he pushed to an even greater theatrical height, emotionally embracing Simpson and all the other lawyers at the defense table. Leaving at last for the funeral, he had time only to whisper a brief word to Darden, the classic rebuke. Nigger, please.
Knock him dead, Darden.
Your Honor, I'd like to address a separate issue.
All right.
Your Honor, Detective Furman's going to play a very small role in this case. But we believe when he's called to the stand, we're going to be forced to go back 15-odd years to ask him about completely irrelevant statements that people have claimed he's made. Now, these statements are racially insensitive and divisive. The question is, why bring them up? Now, they're going to ask him if he made a racial slur or repeated a racial epithet. But why ask? And there's no legal purpose for it. But Mr. Cochran and the defense have a purpose for entering this area. And that purpose is to inflame the passions of the jury and ask them to pick sides. The N-word is a dirty, filthy word, Your Honor. It is so prejudicial and inflammatory that the use of it in any situation will evoke an emotional response from any African American. We're talking about a word that blinds people. And when you mention that word to this jury, it will blind them to the truth. They won't be able to discern what's true and what's not. It will impair their judgment. It will affect their ability to be fair. It'll force the black jurors to make a choice. Whose side are you on? The man or the brothers? Is he serious? So the people strongly urge the court, respectfully, not to allow that vile word to be uttered at any time during this trial.
Your Honor, I did not plan to speak on this matter, but I would be remiss if I did not respond to my good friend, Mr. Chris Darden. Mr. Darden's remarks this afternoon are perhaps the most incredible remarks I have heard in a court of law in my 32 years of practice. His remarks are deeply demeaning to African Americans, and so first and foremost, Your Honor, I would like to apologize to African Americans across this country. It is preposterous to say that African Americans collectively are so emotionally unstable that they cannot hear offensive words without losing their moral sense of right and wrong. They live with offensive words, offensive looks, offensive treatment every day. And so, Your Honor, I am ashamed that Mr. Darden would allow himself to become an apologist for Mark Furman. Who are any of us to testify as an expert as to what words black people can or cannot handle? Your Honor, across America, believe you me, African Americans are offended at this very moment. And so for a friend that I deeply respect, I would say this was outlandish, unfortunate, and unwarranted. Thank you, Your Honor. Nigga, please.
Can I see? Yes. 76% of African Americans do not believe Darden is doing a good job. often at times referring to the ADA as an Uncle Tom?
Yeah, okay. Yeah, that's fine.
Hey, Gil.
I'm in a hurry.
I'd like to do a few interviews with the black press.
Why?
Well, I think it's important that people understand what my role is on this case.
Is this about the poll? Marcia said there was some poll.
76%.
No one's doing press, Chris. If I had to respond every time some crabapple said something about me, you're just going to do more harm, drawing attention to yourself. DAs don't go on talk shows. It's a sensitive case. No press.
Marcia? We need to reconsider Furman.
Oh.
Okay. He's wrong for this case.
You have had a rough couple of weeks. We're not changing our trial strategy because of it. Toughen up. I'm letting Johnny get into your head.
Can I share something with you?
As long as I don't have to get out of this chair. I'm wiped.
In the 70s, when I was in law school, affirmative action was a big deal.
I remember.
No, you don't. You're white. I busted my ass. I had the grades to get into that school. But every time I entered a classroom, I felt like people were staring at me. Like I took some more worthy person's spot. And that bullshit hurts. And those feelings never leave. And now, almost 20 years later, I'm expected to sit and swallow those same kinds of accusations all over again. When Johnny's out there trashing me in front of every TV camera he can find.
But he's wrong. Just like all those idiots who doubted you back then. You are on this case because you are creative, dedicated, and smart. That's why I wanted you.
Thanks.
You're gonna help us win. And Johnny can go screw himself.
Context of White Supremacy. Wowie. Gus T. Renegade, the Black O.J. Simpson. We are basically doing one audio segment today. There are 3 pages left in the chapter, but there's so much to dissect in this week's chapter that we're basically just doing one audio segment. There are 3 pages left in the chapter. We'll get those in, but we basically have the whole program to dissect what we just read, I guess, / heard. Context of White Supremacy. Reading is more important than watching television. The number is 720-716-7300. The code 564-943 #. Press *61 if you would like to participate. Number again, 720-716-7300. The code 564-943 #. Press *61 if you would like to participate. Untiljustice@gmail.com is the email. Untiljustice@gmail.com. Woo! Jeffrey Toobin lied to us. My gosh. Jeffrey Toobin lied to us. Okay, so there are lots of supplementary materials. Before I get to that, the sound clip that we just heard, that is from the FX series, The Run of His Life, which does have Jeffrey Toobin as a consultant, and his character is even portrayed in the series. Now, that was from segment number 5, or I guess episode 5, The Race Card, which is directed by the late John Singleton, Boys in the Hood, among many others, I guess. That scene has so much in it. Okay. First and foremost, no one has benefited more from affirmative action than the Marcia Clarks of the world. She would be the expert. She would be the person to talk to. Not Christopher Darden or any other black person, male, female, child in the known universe. No one has benefited from affirmative action more than the Amy Fishers, Marcia Clarks of the known universe. Massive, enormous lie. Excuse me, every time they project white people are ignorant about everything. White women don't even know about affirmative action. Are you joking? Oh, you're practicing racism. I got it. Okay. Next. Crab apple. So Darden, I'm going to get to the whole N-word exchange. Lots on that. So they can come back from court. Darden is frustrated. Can I see the paper? 76% of black people are dissatisfied with him. Wow, he talks about that a lot in his book. And frequently call him an Uncle Tom, no name calling. He goes to Gil Garcetti, his white boss. Hey, Gil, can I do some interviews with the black press so that they know why I'm on this case? And he says, no press, which was the standard at the time. No press if I responded to every crab apple. And I heard that and I said, crab apple? What? Is that a phrase? Do people say that? For people who, I guess, critique you, or is that a synonym for haters? I'm asking because I've never heard that before. When I heard that, I thought crabs in a barrel. That metaphor is very race specific. Like, I do not hear that metaphor. I'll put it this way. I think about 90% of the time I hear that metaphor invoked is exclusively talking about black people mistreating or being discourteous to other black people. I've heard that way more than I've heard crab apple. Like, I don't even know what am I missing something? Is that a synonym for hater? Crab apple? Is that a 90s bit of I guess slang? Maybe I missed that one. Crab apple? Continuing. They go through so he goes to Gil Garcetti, no press, get out of here. He goes to talk to Marcia Clark. We got to get rid of this Furman guy. It's not going to work. And she tells him to toughen up. Now, she says that to a number of black male characters in the series. And it's something that I just find appalling about that, to have this white woman, suspected racist, repeatedly telling black males to toughen up in a workplace context. Toughen up, and then I don't know nothing about affirmative action. What is that? And then he goes on to this long spiel. That's why we wanted you, because you're so smart and intelligent, and you're going to help us win. And Johnny can go screw himself. Always gets to the genital level. Johnny can go screw himself. All of that is a huge lie. What did we hear last week from Jeffrey Toobin? They needed a black person. That's the language that he used, not Chris Darden. What did we just hear? We didn't hear. Chris Darden is experienced and intelligent and competent and one of the rising trial lawyers in California, North America. That's not what we heard. That's certainly not what he said this week. What he said last week, Jeffrey Toobin, was they needed a black guy. We got all these dumb black people on the jury, and we got this raping, killing black male over here. We need a black guy so it doesn't look like it's a whole table of white people prosecuting this one nigger. And we got Captain Japan. That's what Howard Stern calls Lancito. We got a non-white judge, too. So we got to have some flavor. That's the language that Gil Garcetti used last week. We got to add some flavor to our team. Oh, let's go get Chris Darden. That's not what they say in the series. They clean all that. They don't say Chris Darden is an idiot. Chris Darden is incompetent. Chris Darden doesn't know what he's doing. It's, oh, you're smart and intelligent. And get out. So that's the FX white supremacy propaganda. I'm so glad I did not watch that when it aired. Woo, I already thought OJ was guilty. That would have sealed the deal. All right. I have so many supplementary sources, and I want to make sure people have time to talk again. We only have 3 pages left, so it's basically all time for us to discuss what we have heard. All of the sources have amazing things to add to this, so let's see. I will start. The transcript on this is even fascinating because we really did not get to hear. I would have just played directly the transcript. We would have skipped the FX if I could have got the entire video from the trial of this exchange. Emphasis, this is a major rewind. This happened in January 13th specifically. We were in February when they had the whole blow up, talking about Denise Simpson and all this inadmissible evidence and all that. We had got to February. Now we are rewinding back to January. In fact, things that happened before the trial even started. This is pre-trial motions that happened January 13th. All right, so the transcript. I'm going to try to skip through. If I don't see anything juicy, I'll stop. I'll give a little bit from Johnnie Cochran's book on what he had to say about all this. I'll give a little bit from Marcia Clark's book, and I'll give a little bit from Darden. And then I think you all will find it more fruitful to hear what all of these other people have to say and to confirm Jeffrey Toobin is lying. I totally understand now why Johnnie Cochran said Jeffrey Toobin is a liar. He did not mince words. He said it exactly that way. And he said it repeatedly. He said it in his book. He said it in interviews. Jeffrey Toobin is a liar. That's exactly what he said. I understand 1,000% now. And if I was not a reader, reading is more important than watching television. And that just further confirms for me that O.J. Simpson is innocent, because why would you have to lie about all kinds of things? Why would you have to lie about Johnnie Cochran calling Chris Darden a nigger? Why would you have to lie about something that's so inconsequential? I think I could be wrong. Why would you have to lie about that? If you lie about something as small as that, what else are you lying about? Let's go to the transcript first. We'll just kind of jump through and see if anything hops out. So this is Mr. Darden. I think the best indicational evidence of just how inflammatory the use of the word is a fact that it appears that Mr. Cochran and I, the only two black lead lawyers on each side of the counsel table, are somehow dragged into this issue to argue the issue to the court. And I think that may be due to some part to the fact that if anyone should slip and say or utter the word, it is probably better to have a black person do it, because if you have a white person do it, if a white male takes the witness stand and that word is uttered in this courtroom, it will offend every black juror on this case. It will offend me. It will offend Mr. Cochran. It will offend Mr. Simpson. It will offend the African-American reporters in the courtroom, and it will offend the public and other African-Americans within earshot of that word. It is a dirty, filthy word. It is not a word that I allow to use in my house. We heard that. I spoke to Dean Ullman earlier this morning, and I asked him, I said, Dean, are you going to use the N-word during argument today? He said, nope, not me. Well, if Dean Ullman doesn't want to utter the word, and if Cochran doesn't utter the word or allow others to use that word in his household, and I certainly don't, why then should we allow that word in use in this courtroom, especially in a case like this where it has no probative value? It is completely irrelevant. It was created and designed to do one thing, and that one thing is to demean people, to strip people of their humanity, to evoke emotional response. Your Honor, when you use that word, you are using fighting words. When you use that word in the presence of an African American, you are asking that African American for a reaction. It is a call to arms. It is a test. It is a test of every African American when they hear that word, and the test is, where do you stand? On which side of the line do you stand? Because when that word is used in the presence of an African American has an obligation to do something about it, to say something. An African American has a duty in most situations to confront the declarant. It is the filthiest, dirtiest, upset black jurors. It will give them the test, and the test will be, whose side are you on? My prosecutors, with the man of the brothers. Let's see. It upsets people. They don't like the use of that word. And if you search black literature today, black magazines, you will see letters, writers, and articles, and people asking why that word is used. Why does that word exist? And why would anybody want to use it? Why would anybody want to rap about it? Why would anybody want to write about it? Why would anyone want to repeat it or say it? The word has no place in the English language. Let's see. Furman's going to play a small part. Racial slur, no legal purpose. Blind them. Let's see. When a white person voices it, it becomes a knife. Oh, and he quotes Andrew Hacker to America, blah, blah, blah. When a white person voices it, it becomes a knife with a whetted edge. No black person can hear it with equanimity or ignore it as a simple word. This word has the force to pierce, to wound, to penetrate as no other has. There have, of course, been terms like kike and spick and chink, and I have used those words, and I apologize for using those terms, Your Honor. Did he use one for white people? But these are less frequently heard today, and they lack the same emotional impact. Some non-ethnic terms come closer, such as slut and fag and cripple, yet the N-word stands alone. Christopher Darden calls O.J. Simpson a cripple in the book. Anyway, with this power to tear at one's insides, it will reveal that whites have never created so wrenching an epithet for even the most benighted members of their own race. It is a persistent reminder that you are still perceived as a degraded species of humanity, a level to which whites can never descend. Mr. Cochran would like to ask a white police officer if he ever used that word, and after that white police officer testifies, there will be other white male police officers, and by the time those other officers testify, the jury will have heard this word, they will be upset, they will have become emotional, and as soon as Mr. Cochran works them up into that emotional frenzy, oh my God, woo, okay, I feel a little bit better about reading it. He would like to get them into, as soon as he does that, and the next white police officer takes the witness stand, the jury is going to paint that white police officer with the same brush Mr. Cochran painted Detective Furman, and there begins the decline of the prosecution's case. A very good case, I might add. This word has no place in the courtroom, and it should not be heard before the jury. Let's see. I remember, let's see. Oh, this is in the book. When the jury hears that word from a white police officer, they're going to reflect also, I think, of the most negative experience in their life. And I think that this, or rather the first time that they heard that word, will probably be the most negative experience, and I think they're going to become emotional. Another thing hearing that word causes black people to do, African Americans to do, is it causes you to change your focus. It diverts your attention. If we really want the jury's attention focused on the evidence and the legal and factual issues, the important legal and factual issues inherent in this case, we shouldn't let them hear this word, because if they hear this word, they are going to focus their attention on the issue of race. They are going to be more concerned with whether Mark Furman is a racist than they are with whether there was any way, any possibility, any chance, any theory offered by the defense to establish that Mark Furman planted evidence. Let's see. Oh, wait a minute. Let's see. I think the records are clear that during those days that Mark Furman had been shot at for no reason other than the fact that he was an LAPD officer. His friend had been shot at. His colleagues had been killed. People would spit on him just because he wore a blue uniform. People had directed racial epithets toward him. He had just come back from Vietnam when he joined the LAPD. He was suffering from stress. And it has to be stressful to be a police officer in the city of LA. I mean, geez. I'm sorry. That's what I'm reading the transcript. That's what it says. G-E-E-Z. I mean, geez. That stuff is going on in the city in the last 5 to 6 years. I can't imagine anybody that would want a job like that. But some do, and they ought to be commended. But the point I'm attempting to make here is that there is no limiting instruction that the court can give to the jury or to cause the jury to place the use of this term into some perspective other than the one they have always placed it in, and that is at the top of the list. Number one in the category of the most offensive emotional terms in the English language. Let's see. Anything else? Oh, wait. Let's see. Now, the court may well think, well, Mr. Darden, this is an awful extreme argument that you are making, but it is true. That is what this word does, Your Honor. That is what this word does. And to come from a white police officer, that just exacerbates everything. What happened to Mark Fuhrman 14 years ago under the conditions in which these statements were allegedly made while suffering apparently from some form of stress, a post-traumatic stress, and after his wife left him, it is unfair. It is unfair to introduce the statements in this case. They are inherently unreliable, and it is unfair to allow Mr. Cochran to play the race card and make and turn these proceedings into a race case. If I haven't strenuously objected already to the notion that this word should not be admitted in the court, then let me make it clear I do. All the prosecution wants in this case is a fair shot, a fair trial. We want everybody to play by the rules, and we don't play by the rules when there is a perception that we don't play by the rules. The court sanctions us. Dean Ullman berates us, and we do what we are supposed to do. The rules don't require the court to allow the use of this word into the courtroom. And that's basically it. What I'll do is stop there. If folks want to, one, you could just read this. I've said that repeatedly. Man, quasi-experts on the O.J. Simpson trial, attempted counter-racists should be. You can watch much of this, and or you could just read the trial transcript, which would be quicker. But if you would like to hear what Mr. Cochran says in rebuttal to get some of the juicy parts that we missed, it's not as long. I think I could probably read that much quicker, and then we could be done. But I do want to share what is in Mr. Cochran's book, Marsha Clark's book, and Chris Darden's book on what we just heard about the N-word specifically. So I'll start with... I'll start with Marsha Clark. We always go white first. So Marsha Clark, she says, I knew that it was good. The law was clearly on our side. The drafters of the state evidence code knew that jurors might not be able to resist a strong and irrational emotional reaction. The Negro is just irrational. All right. To something as inflammatory as a racial slur, even if it had no relevance. It was the very reason the code excluded evidence that was more prejudicial than useful in determining the truth. There was no question that the lawyer who could most effectively argue the inflammatory effects of racial epithets, particularly the N-word, was Chris Darden. Chris attacked this mission with righteous conviction, but the night before he was to argue it, he got a case of the nerves. He came to my office, his eyes wide and apologetic, and asked for my help. I gave him what I myself would have used, a straight, rather formal legal argument about how allowing in racial epithets would simply prejudice the jury and obscure the truth. Then he totally threw out what I had written for him, and when he rose to the lectern on the morning of January 13, he spoke from the heart. Now that's important too. Throughout what I said, spoke from the heart, emotional again. All right, so we heard the speech. Blah, blah, blah. I sucked my breath. Chris was taking on the race baiters full in the teeth. Blah, blah, blah. I glanced over at Johnnie Cochran. Gone was the easy posture. He was tensed up like a testy weasel. The chemistry between Chris and Johnnie, I thought, was becoming one of the uglier dynamics in this courtroom. Chris had respected Johnnie so much, but Johnnie didn't respect him back. He couldn't handle another smart and vital black male in the courtroom. Johnnie had played this bullshit race card at scores of other trials where nobody, certainly no white guys, had the huevos to call him on it. Now Chris was hitting him where he lived. Johnnie rose to reply, blah, blah, blah. Okay, this is Johnny's thought. I apologize for Chris. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. What are you saying, Johnnie, that people can hear themselves slandered and feel nothing? If I heard that a witness had referred to women as bitches or cunts, do you think that wouldn't affect me? Now was the time for Judge Lance Ito to shut this travesty down. Any judge with the most rudimentary control of his courtroom would have said, don't waste my time. Don't waste the time of this court, Mr. Cochran. Come up with a proffer to show how it was even possible for Detective Fuhrman to plant that glove. Until you do, we're not talking about about race in this case. O.J. Simpson didn't kill her because she was white, and he did not get arrested because he's black. But Ito let Johnnie flame on. The groundwork had been set for the defense to present for the jury a fantasy that had no place in a court of law. Chris Darden appeared stricken, and what made things worse was the painful public nature of his humiliation, the nakedness of it. With the whole nation, indeed much of the world watching, Johnnie Cochran accused a brother, and she doesn't have it in quotes, italics, Johnnie Cochran accused a brother of selling out his race. What a despicable piece of shit. I reached for the notepad and scribbled a note to Chris. You were beautiful. I wrote him, you were great. All right, so that's Marsha Clark. We'll stop there. Before we get to, next we'll do Christopher Darden next. All right. Johnnie Cochran and I sat on the back bench in Ito's courtroom, facing forward and small-talking about the funeral Cochran was to attend that day for a man shot to death outside his Pacific Palisades home. The man had several civil suits pending against him, suits alleging that he ripped off old and financially strapped people, that he stole their homes out from under them, and Cochran was speaking at that man's funeral. Themed. When Judge Lance Ito came in, Cochran and I stood up. You don't need to turn this into a race case, I said to Cochran as we moved toward our respective positions. Don't do this. There are other ways to defend this guy. He didn't say anything. He just stared straight ahead. Well, I said, let's make this one for the ages. Yeah, he said, let's. Sherry, all right, dirty, filthy word. As I spoke, Simpson started staring at the ceiling. It's all speech. Shapiro and Cochran leaned forward and talked to each other. Johnny looked back at Carl Douglas. You could feel the tension in the courtroom. There was no murmuring in the back today. More from the speech. Andrew Hacker. Basically quotes his whole speech. Then he goes to Cochran. He was apologizing for me. I was dumbfounded. Nowhere in my argument did I say that. I simply made a legal argument, one that is made every day in America, that some evidence was too prejudicial to be used. Did Cochran realize what he was doing? That was all I could take. Apologist, I stood up to say something and looked around the courtroom. Simpson had that same smug look on his face. Carl Douglas was rocking back and forth in his chair, and the judge just let Cochran roll on about me. He was using all the buzzwords: demeaning, offensive, ashamed, apologist, used. I would be the first to acknowledge that my argument was emotional, but it was not vindictive and it was not personal. Cochran was talking to all the brothers out there, pulling back the curtain, pointing at me and calling traitor. I knew how it would be received in the hood. I asked myself, is he doing this on purpose? Is he trying to strip me of my identity to put my life at risk? He said that he wanted to keep them from cross-examining Furman, but that wasn't true. I realized that Kathleen Bell incident was fair game. I was just arguing that the 1981 and 1982 reports were too old and that the word itself, the awful word nigger, had no place in this case. I sat down again and faced the back of the courtroom, enraged. At that moment, I hated Johnnie Cochran, and it pained me to hate another man, especially another black man I had considered a colleague. Perhaps I really had offended Cochran, but more likely I realized later I also cut too close to the only case he had to present. When I said he only wanted to turn this into a race case, I didn't realize to what extent I was correct, or the depths to which he and other defense lawyers would go. Everyone else was still looking at the evidence and the legal foreplay. I had cut right to it, and Cochran was threatened. This was going to be a case about race and only about race, and since I was the only person who could see that, I was the enemy. And then we broke for the new recess. Douglas came up to Cochran, grinning, patting his back. Shapiro put his hands on Cochran's shoulders and complimented him. Marcia and Sherry tried to compliment me on my argument, but I walked past them out of the courtroom and took the elevator up to the war room. The phones were jumping off the hook. I was drained and bitterly angry at the same time. What do you think of Cochran? I spun around to see who said it. It was a clerk. I just kept walking. Runyon was pacing around, pissed. Melissa Decker was sitting in a chair, frowning. In my cubicle, the telephone rang. Darden? You fucking sellout motherfucker. I slammed the phone down, and it rang again. Uncle Tom. And again. You are a disgrace to your race. Again. Don't ever refer to yourself as black 'cause you ain't. Again. How could you allow yourself to be used like that? This is important. Some of the voices sounded like white people. Now, I've said for some time now, I don't know how you would distinguish anyway, but I'm not surprised if... Anyway, I'll continue reading. I'll read what I said again and then continue. Some of the voices sounded like white people. You and your family are all apes. Somewhere in there, Marcia called to say that court was back in session and that Judge Ito wanted me back in there. I told her to go on without me, but Ito joked that it wouldn't be as interesting until I returned. In the courtroom, Cochran, Ito, and the rest laughed and joked. The court TV commentators told their viewers that we were doing what lawyers did. We were acting. It's all part of the game. It wasn't a game for me. In my little soft-walled office, the telephone just kept ringing, and I answered each call. Darden, if I ever see you on the streets of Los Angeles, you're one dead nigger. I winced and stared at the random collection of notes that I'd used in court that day. What had I said? I had said that the first time you hear that word, you never forget. Even that day, the word hurt as badly as it had the first time. Stop. All right, so now we will get Johnnie Cochran. What does he have to say about all of this? And then we will get to the phone lines. Hopefully this is helpful supplemental material. I thought it would be more, as I said, fruitful to hear all of this and then give you an opportunity to comment on what we have heard. Hopefully it will not be overload. All right, so this is Johnnie Cochran. Okay. Prior to being assigned to the Cowlings grand jury, Darden had served in one of the units I had supervised as assistant district attorney, the Special Investigation Division, or SID, which is charged with prosecuting police misconduct. Eric Ferrer and I had dealt with him frequently in the past. From the start, Chris had attempted to cultivate me as a kind of mentor, sometimes even addressing me affectionately as stepdaddy. He professed admiration for the work our firm was doing, obtaining compensation for victims of police misconduct. I strongly believe in encouraging young African-American lawyers. So when the supervisory spot in SID became vacant and Darden called asking me to recommend him to his supervisors for the job, I did so. Superiors. He didn't get it, and I can't say I was particularly surprised. The truth was that despite his carefully cultivated reputation as a buster of rogue cops, Darden pursued extraordinarily few of the complaints filed with him. As far as I know, he personally tried only one such case, a misdemeanor growing out of the police riot that took place during an abortive drug sweep at 39th and Dalton in one of the city's poorer black neighborhoods. Chris lost. I had been particularly troubled by his role in a case Eric and I had settled only the previous August. In early September of 1991, police officers in West Covina of suburban community in the San Gabriel Valley east of Los Angeles were investigating a string of shopping mall robberies. In the course of those inquiries, they sought permission to search the apartment of Daryl Stevens, a 27-year-old African-American who had no part in the crimes. When Stevens demanded that they produce a warrant, the officers left, vowing to return and kick ass. Shortly after dawn, 2 days later, 10 members of the West Covina Police Department SWAT team used a battering ram to shatter the door of Stevens' apartment. Seconds later, neighbors heard a hail of automatic weapons fire. Daryl Stevens lay dead in his underwear face down on the floor of his own bedroom. He was shot 28 times, all in the back. Stevens' anguished parents went to the Los Angeles County District Attorney's Office, and Darden was assigned to investigate the case. While he ultimately told the parents he felt great sympathy for them, he also claimed he had been unable to develop sufficient evidence of misconduct to warrant any criminal prosecution of any of the officers involved. our firm took the parents' civil case and filed suit in federal court. While we were preparing for trial, we received a telephone call from Chris Darden. There was one piece of evidence, he said, of which he thought we should be aware. One of the SWAT officers who had burst into Stephen's bedroom that morning had left on the radio microphone attached to his flak jacket. The incident had been recorded. The last words you could hear the officer saying before he emptied the magazine of his AR-15 into the helpless Stevens were, "Don't move, nigger." Chris said he was sure the epithet was on the tape since he had heard it himself while conducting the investigation. We obtained the recording, and it was one of the key pieces of evidence that led the city of West Covina to settle with the Stevens parents for $875,000. In the course of reviewing the case, however, Eric and I noticed something very troubling. The official report on the incident Darden had prepared for the district attorney's office contained no mention of the tape or its contents. I had always been slightly troubled by the aura of an adolescent Hamlet that always seemed to surround Darden. Everything about his life and profession seemed to leave him in a state of unresolved conflict. As a former prosecutor myself, I was not unaware of how powerful the pressures to conform could be within the city attorneys and district attorneys' offices, particularly when you hoped for advancement as Darden did. But there were times during our acquaintance, as in the Stevens case, when it seemed to me that Chris felt he was always free to make the most self-serving choice so long as he looked sufficiently anguished over it. Some of that I attributed mainly to the difference in our ages. As a beneficiary of the civil rights struggles waged by previous generations, Chris Darden seemed to me to be one of those young blacks who had had the luxury of assimilating the narcissism so common among Americans his age. "Nobody understands my pain but me because only I have suffered it" could be their motto. Like Frederick Douglass, W.E.B. Du Bois, Dr. King, Holiday This Week, and Malcolm X, they understand the anger discrimination engenders, but their self-involvement forever forestalls them from experiencing the liberation those great men found in selfless commitment. As I was about to discover, Chris Darden's reticence in the Stevens case apparently reflected a much deeper emotional distress than I had suspected. When Sherry Lewis's argument shambled to a halt, Darden took the podium. He was concerned about what the impact would be when the jurors, 8 of whom were black at that point, heard that Mark Fuhrman had employed the epithet. I had expected a legal argument about relevance, but this was something quite different. If I understood where Chris was heading, he was about to argue that black jurors were somehow peculiarly unfit to hear this word, even if it had in fact been used by a participant in the case. Sure enough, as Darden continued, my mind suddenly jumped back to an afternoon some years before when, during a business trip to another city, I had wandered into a second-hand bookstore while killing time between appointments. Killing time? As a small boy in Shreveport years before, the Encyclopedia Britannica had been my first window on the wider world. But, as you might imagine, the volumes to which I had ready access were hardly up to date. They were, as I have never forgotten for some reason, part of the 1911 edition. Imagine my happy surprise then when in this bookstore that afternoon I stumbled across that very version of my treasured encyclopedia. I couldn't help but pick up a volume, and as I lovingly thumbed through it, my eye fell on an entry I had never glimpsed as a little boy. Under the heading, "The Negro," it read, "Mentally, the Negro is inferior to the white." Various pseudo-Darwinian explanations were offered for that observation, concluding with, "The arrest or even deterioration in mental development is no doubt very largely due to the fact that after puberty, sexual matters take the first place in the Negro's life and thoughts. The mental constitution of the Negro is very similar to that of a child, normally good-natured and cheerful, but subject to sudden fits of emotion and passion, during which he is capable of performing acts of singular atrocity, impressionable, vain, but often exhibiting in the capacity of servant a dog-like fidelity." As I subsequently discovered, that entry was written by Walter Francis Wilcox, chief statistician of the United States Census Bureau. Discovering that slander in a book that had meant so much to me was difficult, but sadly unsurprising, given the era in which it was written. What was surprising, stunning in fact, was hearing a fresh version of the same old calumny coming from the lips of Los Angeles County District Attorney. When you mention, in the prosecution's view, our 8 black jurors were children, so emotional and fragile, so easily influenced and led, that despite everything else they had suffered and overcome, a single word would cause them to take leave of their reason and abandon any notion of duty, justice, or moral obligation. Were there similar words to which white, Latino, or Asian jurors would respond in kind, or was this a uniquely black characteristic? The whole thing reminded me of former police chief Daryl Gates' insistence that the reason his officers' chokeholds killed more blacks than whites was because blacks were built differently. I don't think I've ever been quite as angry in a courtroom as I was when I rose to respond to Darden's remarks. It was one of the few times during the Simpson trial that I acutely felt the presence of the cameras in the courtroom. I could not allow these vile sentiments to go unrefuted before so many people. Darden's remarks this morning, Darden continued to argue that certain facts were just too inflammatory for black jurors to hear. As an example, he claimed that O.J. has a fetish for blonde-haired white women. But that the prosecutors would not try to bring that up because it would inflame the passions of the jury. Shades of the 1911 and Walter Francis Wilcox, I thought. Let's see. Darden slumped in his chair, pointedly, turning and staring away from me toward the back of the courtroom. Judge Ito looked legitimately pained. This is the one main unresolved problem of our society, he said, and for those of us who grew up in the 60s and had hoped this would kind of go away, it's a big disappointment to still have to read this stuff. Fair enough, I thought, but it's worse to have to try cases in which evidence may have been tampered with by police officers who still believe this stuff. Ito subsequently ruled that we could introduce relevant evidence of Furman's racism. We'll stop there. And the last tidbit, and then we will get to the phone lines. Thank you for your patience. You can let me know if it has been not constructive to hear all the additional information, but it's so rich with sources about this moment in the trial. The last source, because I said Jeffrey Toobin lied to us, and he certainly did, probably more than once. So all the sources that I've read thus far, no one mentions Johnnie Cochran saying to Chris Darden, "Nigger, please." So did he say it loud enough that Jeffrey Toobin heard it, who was not sitting at the prosecution table? Did he say it loud enough that nobody heard it but Jeffrey Toobin, Chris Darden, and Johnnie Cochran? Was it a whisper that only Jeff Toobin, maybe he was able to mouth and get it? Was that what it was? Are you telling me that this happened and Marsha Clark doesn't put it in her book? This happens and Johnnie Cochran doesn't put it in his book? Even pause for a second. Let's imagine for a minute. You are Chris Darden. You're in the trial of the century, they say. Johnnie L. Cochran Jr. calls you a nigger in the court of law. You are paid a substantial sum of money to write a book about your courtroom experience. Do you include Johnnie L. Cochran Jr. calling you a nigger in the book? My answer immediately was yes. In fact, my answer might be titled, Johnnie L. Cochran Jr. called me a nigger during the O.J. Simpson trial. That might be the title of my memoir if that had happened. Chris Darden didn't even mention that. The cherry on top, what does Chris Darden's daughter have to say about all of this? She has a blog. You can check it out, Coco Fly, The Darden Dilemma. She gets down to the bottom. What really went down? Twitter turned into the playground during the scene where Cochran turns to my TV dad, and says, "Nigga, please." I could imagine the ooze from people on Twitter as if they were kids watching a fight. This was following my TV dad's request to the court that the N-word be removed from the trial. I asked my dad if that "nigga please" comment happened, and he said it did not happen, which is not surprising because it's not in his book. I would think if that had happened, he would have put it in the book. Maybe that would have been the title of his book instead of In Contempt. So Jeffrey Toobin lied to us? That is a question. That's one reason to have to give all those background sources so I can say it with some confidence and bass in my voice that this is not a, oh, I'm kind of speculating. And, no, Jeff Toobin lied to us at least one time, probably many. So why would he lie about something so insignificant? Maybe it's not. Maybe I'm confused. Why would he feel the need to lie and say that Johnnie Cochran called Christopher Darden a nigger in the courtroom? Said nigger please specifically, but that's the same thing. Why would he have to lie about something like that? And he doubled down on it because it's in the film. And then sometimes it depends on which site you go to. I had seen this scene in the FX series before we got to it in the book. I fact-checked the television series, and the first article I went to said, no, this didn't happen. However, Johnnie Cochran did do an interview where he said he felt like saying that. So at the time, I said, no problem, dramatic license, this is not a documentary. Now that I see that this is in the book, totally different. This is a massive act of racism, and then you double down on it and put it in the film. So when people go and they look, did this happen? Some articles you go to, because the book we're reading is considered the definitive source on the O.J. Simpson trial, for some people, you read this book, oh, yeah, it happened. Jeffrey Toobin, he quoted it exactly. Yep, it happened. Johnnie Cochran called Chris Darden a nigger. You would have to do some extra digging. You might have to read Chris Darden's book, might have to read Johnnie Cochran's book, or read a bunch of them to, wait a minute. It doesn't seem that this is substantiated. Why would the people involved in this, why would none of them say this and only Jeff Toobin? Cameras were in the courtroom. Court TV didn't catch it. No press. The LA Times wrote about, everybody wrote about this day. New York Times, LA Times, everybody. No press outlet has any mention of Johnnie Cochran calling Chris Darden a nigger. So I'll stop there. So the question, why would Jeffrey Toobin lie about Johnnie Cochran calling Christopher Darden a nigger in the courtroom? Number again is 720-716-7300. The code 564-943 #. Press *61 if you would like to participate. Again, we're not even doing another audio segment because I was like, wow, there's so much material. We're just going to get those last 3 pages in and we're done. So we can take the entire time to share about what we heard. Folks who dialed in with commentary, line should be open. You can let me know if you got too much, if we're overloaded on background material and have not been able to assimilate it all, you can let me know. But I thought it would be relevant. Folks who dialed in with a hand up, line should be open. Proceed.
Can I be heard? Hello? Can I be heard? Am I being heard? No?
Oh, yes, sir. I can hear you.
Oh, okay. Greetings, Gus, callers and listeners. Excellent program this evening. Very interestingly enough, that was one of the questions that I had down when Johnnie Cochran called Chris Darden a nigger. I was like, did that happen? And to address the question, I would say Jerry Toobin lied about that to kind of say, like, look, black people call each other niggas too, you know, man, because it was so much focus on Mark Furman using the word nigger. So I think it was sort of like kind of like a reflection. And then the other, I thought it was very constructive to have the People versus OJ movie clip play alongside the reading. It made it more, it was like a, for me, I could visualize it, I would say. It was very good, and adding the extra commentary from the different books, I think, was also good as well, just to gives you different perspectives on, just gives you different perspectives. And I wanted to say that although the People versus O.J., like the movie, wasn't that constructive, the black male that played Christopher Darden, after I watched the People versus O.J., and then I watched the series on the movie, Jerry Toobin movie, I thought that the black male that played this Christopher Darden did an excellent job playing that role. And as far as the reading, I thought it was interesting where when Christopher Darden was in college, his nickname was Sugar D, and he was labeled as sweet. I found that interesting. And when Jeffrey Toobin was describing Johnnie Cochran responding to the word, I believe it was, he described Johnny as bigger physically and mentally. And looking back, like watching the trial and then watching the movie, I didn't think that Johnnie Cochran was physically bigger than Christopher Darden. And he also said that, like, you know, he was just a bigger, stronger man. And I found that interesting because I know there's a considerable age difference between the two. And just previously in the same reading, he was describing Christopher Darden and said that he played football and he also ran track. And I thought it was interesting for him to describe Johnnie Cochran as physically bigger and stronger. And that's all I have right now. Thank you.
Much obliged, Rob, in California, very close to where all this took place, a little bit further south. White supremacy, propaganda. Let's see. Other folks who dialed in with a hand up. If you have commentary to share, proceed.
Hello?
Victim, yes, sir.
Hi there, Gus. I just wanted to comment on when I don't know who called Darden sweet. It reminded me of the Delectable Negro from that book that we had in the book club. So, like, a sweet black person is a person that doesn't know what white supremacy is. A sweet black person is someone that is white identified, and so that's that particular word that was used in the audio text really stood out to me. And then I think Toobin was talking about Chris Darden's behavior in the courtroom with Johnnie Cochran, and how they were kind of, you know, in the crab bowl in the crab bowl. I think it was sorry. Well, anyways, when you're asking about the crab apple, they sometimes call non-white people crab apples. A crab apple is a sour, immature fruit on a tree. So that's where they got the crab apples. Jimmy Kimmel did a joke on Lil Wayne calling him a crab apple. So they tend to call non-white people crab apples. And there's something else. And the word, the N-word. So there's a lot of white identified people who don't like to hear the N-word used. And Mr. Fuller says we're supposed to take ownership of words because words are tools. So no one shouldn't be upset if the word nigger is being used because it's a word that's within the lexicon. You know, that's within in the dictionary words that people will use, so it's a word that should be used, but no one shouldn't be afraid of the word nigger. And there was something else that I wanted to say. Also, with Christopher Darden's behavior, they're kind of implying that he's kind of childish and immature, and they were questioning his ability to litigate as a lawyer. And I think that's it. Thank you.
Much obliged, victim. Definitely delectable Negro with Sugar D, Christopher Darden's frat name while he was in college. Although I'm not really sure what that meant. Like, because they didn't give a big explanation. He just said Darden's frat name was Sugar D because it is said he was sweet. Now that, I mean, I don't know. I would need more detail. That's one where I would say you got to give me a lot more detail, because I've heard that mean all kinds of things. Sometimes that can mean that a person is helpful. Sometimes that could mean that a person engages in incorrect sexual activity. I mean, sometimes it could mean that person consumes a lot of sugary foods. I mean, I don't know. Like, you'd have to tell me why exactly did they think you were sweet, and then give me more details. But yeah, I just had question mark. Like, what does that mean? Definitely delectable Negro, but I would need more detail. If folks have any guesses, let me know. Let's see. Make sure. Darden's frat name was Sugar D because it is said he was sweet. He led quietly, more by example than exhortation, but his passionate commitment to his fellow African Americans stood out even in that politicized era. Now, does that mean you're sweet? Passionate commitment to African Americans? Is that sweet? I don't know. That's what I said. Don't know. I wasn't able. Even, in fact, sometimes if you make a shot, like if you, Steph Curry or Kobe Bryant or somebody, you make a shot, they'll say sweet. I mean, we'll see. Other folks, if you have a thought on what Toobin may have meant or why Mr. Darden got that nickname during his college years. Other folks who dialed in with a hand up, if you have commentary.
Can it be heard?
Greetings, retired firefighter.
Greetings, Gus. Greetings to everyone. I was calling in to respond to the prescribed meaning of sweet back in the mid-'70s. I'm assuming, based on what I heard about Chris Darden, that he is somewhere around my age. I think it stated that he graduated from high school in 1974. That would make him, if that's so, that would make him either 1 or 2 years ahead of me, which is generally the same time. During that time, for the most part, and to my knowledge and understanding, the term sweet applied to a male would not have meant homosexuality. It meant about a personality that is accepted by everybody, you know, quote unquote nice guy, a much more hip terminology of identifying a person who is real nice, who gets along with just about everybody. Matter of fact, there was even a Hall of Fame football player who was tagged with a similar nickname by the name of Walter Payton as Sweetness. But at that time, that's what that term primarily meant. I was just listening to his background as far as fraternity, and also the college, the undergrad, I guess it's undergrad, that he attended, San Jose State. Of course, a little bit later than Mr. Smith and Mr. Carlos. That's it. I was just trying to give him my try at answering that question. And I'll listen and comment later. Thank you.
Much obliged, retired firefighter. We got a Chicago reference. OJ went out there and hid that knife and maybe gave a howdy to the legend Walter Payton on the way back to L.A. after dumping incriminating evidence. Sweetness in Chicago. Let's see. Other folks, commentary they needed to share. Greetings, Emmy. Your volume is kind of low. If you could speak up, lots of black self-respect. Namaste.
Namaskaram. As a matter of fact, let's try this. Better?
Yes. Yes, ma'am.
Is that better? Hello? Okay. For the record, it's not my self-respect. It was these headphones that I'm trying out. I don't think the mic is very good, so I had to switch. But I wasn't able to hear everything, so I don't know if people commented this already. I don't know if you've posed a very specific question that people are answering right now, but I'll just comment on a couple of things while I have the opportunity. Number one, I appreciated Cochran's explanation when he cited the definition in the dictionary. I thought that was logical. I thought it was systematic. I thought that it was scientific. And for me, I think that is definitely appropriate in the sense that it made sense as to why he would say what he said. But even without that, what he said to me about the quote-unquote N-word was it aligned more with how I felt. I actually could understand both of their perspectives. I tried to, like if you're a lawyer, you probably wouldn't want something, whether it's a word or image or whatever it is, to be introduced that could be emotion invoking and then sway the jury in a direction or not. But then I understood and resonated a lot more with Cochran's stance that we are mature enough people to be able to be presented with material, whatever it is, that could be emotionally invoking and still get work done. That's how I interpreted or internalized what he said. And it resonated with me because I actually feel that way when people posture like they want to protect me from what might be quote unquote racially, says, well, I don't want to say this, or any of that pussyfooting or tiptoeing, I really find disrespectful to my intelligence and to my ability to handle material like that. So I just personally resonated with Cochran. That's not to say if anyone else didn't or whatnot, they're wrong. That's just my perspective. Another part of the text that I just thought was so interesting is the protecting of her innocence or whatnot. I will state for the record that what people do in their bedrooms is their business. However, when it comes to who killed who and what's really going on, I do think it matters how many people she's sleeping with. I think, and not just how many, but maybe who, because the same accusation that they could be placing on OJ could be somebody else. who might be some jealous lover. So I don't think it was so much to tarnish her image, although that might happen. But it does offer, like, it would pose the question or put the question on the table, who else could be frustrated, angry, jealous, or whatever with this woman? And so I didn't particularly care for how Toobin tried to spin that. And then I find that Toobin is also kind of playing up the juxtaposition of two black males. And I see that a lot, like I guess, not a metaphor, but one place you see it is like with Malcolm X and Dr. Martin Luther King, putting the two, like a radical one and then maybe like a less radical one or something like that against each other. Toobin is playing that up in the text. And I think that's really all I wanted to say for now. Maybe I'll chime in later. Oh, and I did want to say thank you for all the supplemental additions that you're adding, guys. I find it very helpful. So if you continue to do that, thank you, because I do think it's nice to hear, or not even nice, it's constructive to hear each one of them share their side. And then the affirmative action part, I do agree with you. And then the way that just the patronizing, the white woman is very patronizing. I forget her name, but she's very patronizing, and it's just obvious to me in the text. So thank you all for listening.
Much obliged, Emmy. No one has benefited more from affirmative action than white women like Marsha Clark. Much obliged for the commentary, folks who dialed in to share thus far. The dictionary portion, I thought the portion in Johnnie Cochran's book where he was talking about the dictionary meaning for Negro, Johnnie L. Cochran Jr., Grandcestor, definitely would encourage folks to. Most of his book is not even about O.J. Simpson, and even to Emmy's point about the playing up the conflict, that would be a reason to lie and say, oh yeah, Johnnie Cochran called him a nigger in the courtroom, to play that up, like, oh yeah, and this race baiting weasel Johnnie Cochran in here calling Chris Darden a nigger in the courtroom. The shame of it all. Let's see. Other folks have comments they need to get in.
Can I be heard?
Thomas in New York. Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. I didn't watch the FX series. I was aware that it was on. I probably saw bits and pieces of it. But it was so long. But I'm not a fan of Cuba Gooding. But I do think that a lot of his legal problems are coming because he played that part probably a little too good for white people. Nicole Simpson, I was watching the news, and they said, this was a couple of weeks ago, that Dr. Dre had an aneurysm, and his house was broken into. And so I said, interesting. So Nicole Simpson, at the beginning of this, one of the readings earlier in the book, was said to be struggling, and only to have, I think, $90,000 to her name when she moved to her home in Brentwood. No job, I imagine, spousal or child support, but able to live in the same neighborhood where Dr. Dre just had his house broken into. So I'm looking at it like, for $90,000, a white woman can afford to live in a billionaire zip code. You know, this is, I can't imagine how that works, but she was able to do that. Sugar D, I can see that being a name from that era, something that a guy would call themselves, you know, to make the ladies, you know, make them sound more sexy, you know, especially when you look at Mr. Darden, you know, that's a catch, you know, I'm sweet, you know. Johnnie Cochran, who's made a very good living at this point of his life, exposing racism within the system of law, I don't think Christopher Darden was ignorant to that fact. For him to act like he didn't know that was his role was to counter that, I think is disingenuous. I remember Darden being upset after the sidebar and sitting there with his arms crossed and pouting, his lips poked out, and he wasn't apologizing to Ito. A lot of the sidebars, the camera and stuff didn't have privy to what the conversation was. So you're just like looking. I remember he made him look very emotional. And the media made fun of him. The legal experts the media would bring on, it made it seem like he didn't know what he was doing. He needed to be removed from the case. But that day, he argued, I'm not sure if it was the same day, but it was in the reading, the court not to use the word nigger. That's the day when I think all the black people turned on him. He lost that argument in court. Johnnie Cochran made him look really bad. And over the years, I developed a better understanding of the system, and I may have forgiven Chris Darden. And then we go back to tonight, and I have to take it back again. You know, he had to know what he was doing. We have a prosecutor in a city where the police are undebatably racist, who is defending the cops and his who are his colleagues, by the way, and for using the word nigger in court. You know, it was like, what precedent is he trying to set? You know, so yeah, Christopher Darden, I think he'll forever go down in history for that. I mean, my line. Thank you.
Much obliged, Thomas in New York. The transcript. He's a victim of racism, but the transcript does not sound good. It has not aged well. I'll say it that way. It is not fine wine they used to call Kobe Vino, L.A. No. That transcript did not age well at all. Let's see. Did I want to include, because it's short. I feel like we can get Johnnie Cochran's full response in, and then we can be done. I can get my notes in, and everything will be good. Let's see. So, Mr. Cochran, funeral attended day, some thug hooligan, where they asked him to speak. A few things. I'd be remiss were I not to apologize to African Americans. To say that our jurors, because they hear this offensive word every day that people call, that they interact with people we have heard this in the questionnaires, to say that they can't be fair is absolutely outrageous. For the prosecution to stand here and over the last couple of days to present character assassination against this man, unfounded, bogus charges, I love that word, after bogus charges after charge after charge, then to withdraw 17 of those charges, for them to have the temerity and unmitigated gall to come into this courtroom and talk about fairness. What are we going to be talking about this afternoon, Your Honor? Is words out of the mouth of Mark Furman. What I want to share with you are the things that this man said, not what we made up, what he said, what he told people, and I am ashamed that Mr. Darden would allow himself to, okay, an apologist. Being a lawyer is tough. Being a judge is tough. That doesn't make you use racism. You can't justify that in a civilized society. To try and pretend that racism doesn't exist in this country is to bury one's head in the sand. It is the height of naivete. Nobody wants to introduce race into this case, Your Honor. But as Mr. Darden has pointed out, race plays a part of everything in America. what has happened with African Americans, we have tried to rise above that because we understand that there are racists in this country, but yet we still love this country because we have helped build this country. So I'm proud to be an African American, but I don't wear that. I am also a lawyer. I am a lawyer who happens to be an African American, but I will not allow myself to be used under these circumstances to become an apologist for people who use racist statements in the past to malign other African Americans. To say that I'm some expert to come here and testify as an expert to what black people think in America, all across America today, believe me, black people are offended at this very moment. And so I have to say this was uncalled for. Let's see. Too emotional about all this. But let's step back and see what we are talking about here. What the prosecution seeks to do, Your Honor, is to prescribe the defense. If you listen carefully to Miss Lewis, and she did a fine job this morning, it was almost as though she switched places with Dean Ullman. She talked to Your Honor about incidents that were too old. Oh, she switched. Maybe we don't need the rest. Because, yeah, we didn't get to hear her arguments. Sherry Lewis was the prosecution, another white woman. Let's see. Let's see. I'll get the last portion. Let's see. The final thing I would like to say before we take our break, Your Honor, it seems to me somebody needs to say to these prosecutors that the fact that they are prosecutors doesn't mean that they are always right. They don't have any priority on the truth. And the arrogance they have each shown in standing up here and talking about this mountain of evidence, and then come whining back to you saying, well, gee, there it is again. We got Darden with G's and Johnnie Cochran with G. So Johnnie Cochran, gee, we can't get a fair trial because jurors are going to be thrown off by one word. How preposterous is that? You will not be swayed by that. And it seems to me that professional lawyers don't talk in terms of, we've got all this evidence against him. They withdrew it the next day. They are mouthing. If they've got so much evidence, let them produce it in court and stop talking about it, and let's all play by the rules. Let's play by the fair rules here, and all we want to do is have our fair opportunity. They, Your Honor, do not have a right to prescribe our cross-examination, and what they would do out of tactics is Mark Furman has been a central person in this case, but in listening to it this morning, Your Honor, all of a sudden, he is a very, very minor player in this case. They wouldn't even call him if they don't want to. They don't want to call Dr. Golden. That's an important one, too. But, Your Honor, they are left and stuck with these witnesses. We didn't create them, and we have an opportunity and a duty to vigorously cross-examine. When we return this afternoon, I will ask leave of court to continue my remarks and share them with Dean Ullman. I will stop there. The grandcestor, Johnnie L. Cochran, Jr. Whew. The clowning just continued, and that I told you that phrase, I think it was 2 weeks ago. F. Lee Bailey, he said we should have an air of controlled indignance about all of this. That, what you heard, right? Controlled indignance. It continued and intensified as the trial went on and the prosecution's case began to fall apart. It just continued and grew and grew. Controlled indignance. The audacity to come out here with this nonsense charging O.J. Simpson. You ought to be ashamed. Let's see. I did actually have notes. I didn't even read my notes. And we will get those last 3 pages in, and then we'll be done. See if folks have any other thoughts, or much obliged to the folks who responded to Sweetness as well. Thomas in New York, Michael, retired firefighter in Florida. Much obliged. Let's see. Notes that I had from this week. I feel like I talked so much I didn't even get to my notes. Let's see. 15. I'll say while I'm getting to my notes, we have read more than half of the book, but we have substantially more than half of the trial to go. Yeah, I'll leave it there. So he starts off the book. We didn't even do the 911. That 911 call is so important. They're talking about what the defense is making this up about drugs. That 911 call is available on YouTube, the October 1993 911 call. You can hear some of what O.J. Simpson is yelling about, and he said quite a bit more than having Keith, whatever his name is, Islama Witch or whatever it is, over here performing fellatio on him. He does say that, but he also says this Keith guy is a drug seller. He's using drugs. He's selling drugs. He should not be around our children. Toobin leaves that out completely now. If he sat in court and heard all that, like, come on, man. You're just flagrantly lying. I mean, if O.J. did it, you wouldn't have to leave that out. It'd just be like, whatever. He said, he tried to make up some nonsense about accusing her of drugs or whatever. Maybe she was on drugs. Who cares? He killed her, period. That would just be it, as opposed to, I would just leave all that out. He just came in, yeah. And he lied again. She was not weeping. You can listen to that 911 call. She's not weeping. The 911 operator asks her, have you been struck? She says, no. Do you need medical attention? No. The officer arrives. Did he hit you? No. Now, she could have been lying, but I mean, no pictures? Is the officer in on it with her and saying, oh, no, we'll cape for OJ, protect you? I tend to think she was just being truthful because she was saying she wanted him out and all the rest of it, but I mean, he said no physical abuse, and you can hear him in the background, as I said, from a distance, not right up on her like strangle distance, but from a distance. Sounded like he's upset about potential danger and irresponsible behavior, drug behavior being exposed to his children. There's so much language in this portion of the book around children and people being childish. Oh, wait a minute. Even in the 911 call, he says she couldn't have feigned the terror in her voice again. OJ is not abusing her. He's not being physical. He's yelling about her conduct and things she's exposing the children to. She does not sound like a terrorized person. She wants him to leave. Like, skillful use of the word terrorism. Let's see. But yeah, you can listen to the 911 tapes and make your own conclusion. Pause right here. Jeffrey Toobin, if you recall, he started this book with O.J. Simpson's letter to Nicole Brown Simpson with all the typos and talking about we have caped for this black male and he can't even spell. He has the intelligence of a kindergartner. Remember all that? That's how he started the book. And then he followed that up in the introduction. He said the prosecution lost this case because Marsha Clark was arrogant and Chris Darden was incompetent. That's two dumb black people. And then the whole jury is ignorant. Remember, he spent all that time talking about none of them went to college and they don't have magazine subscriptions and they don't read the newspaper. So all the black people involved in this case are ignorant, except Johnnie Cochran. Maybe he thinks Johnnie Cochran is dumb too. I have to pay attention. But unless or it's not. I just told you. It's flagrant examples throughout the book. All of the black people who are involved in this case are ignorant, maybe even called Douglas, except Johnnie Cochran. Nicole Brown Simpson is a party animal by his description, a do-nothing, no-count white person, and apparently it runs in the family. He says, the four Brown sisters all looked and sounded alike, and they reflected the values of their moneyed Orange County upbringing. All four had breast implants, but not one had a college degree. Now, why aren't they no-count and ignorant? Why aren't they stupid? Why didn't he talk about them the same way? Do they have, like, subscriptions to the National Enquirer? Do they have subscriptions to National Geographic, the L.A. Sentinel? Are they reading up on Danny Schatzman to get the Negro perspective on the trial? Do they have a subscription to the L.A. Times? Come on. Just like Cato and the company. Look how many no-count white people are even involved in this case who have no job, no ambition, do nothing. Her whole family, they're living off of O.J. Simpson. They got juice welfare. Cato got juice welfare. Look at how many no-count white people are just in this alone who none of them get described as dumb and ignorant. Continuing. Let's see. And she's a drunkard. No count and a drunkard. Imagine that she spent, right before the murder, she spent 8 days in jail for drunk driving. She could have killed somebody herself. Let's see. And just paying attention to the way he describes people. Remember last week, he described the 911 dispatch operator, Miss Gilbert. He described her as the rotund, kindly black woman. Denise Brown gets described as still beautiful, but with an unmistakable hard edge. That's a far cry from describing you like some plantation Negro from Gone with the Wind. Let's see. Next. I think Denise was just, and I don't know if it's there or not, if he's going to get the recital video, because that's, you want to talk about lawyers doing unethical things, like, to have Denise Brown get up here and talk about O.J. Simpson, where she gets up there and talks about all this alleged abuse and what he looked like the night of the recital, and then to not have that video, like, I'm going to have to wait to see if that comes up a little bit later when they actually bring the video in, because that was worthy of rebuke. But, yeah, I feel like everything has evolved. He talks about how they could have done a better job presenting Denise Brown's testimony, as opposed to trying to make it seem like O.J. Simpson was this domestic violence machine, which was untrue. That is just the way it gets presented, that he was a domestic violence machine, the man, not that he's just going around abusing her all the time. That isn't true. Even the verbal abuse. Listen to that 911 call. Same pair, or right below, he says, context, presenting this photograph with no context. And it's important because there was a photograph, and they give additional detail if you watch Court TV or read some of the additional notes around this. Nicole Brown Simpson played a movie role where she was abused. She allegedly had photographs of her in movie makeup where she had been abused. So it was questioned, are some of these photos where she was actually beaten, or some of these photos where she was in a movie? That was another reason why the prosecution was fussed at for this, putting these pictures up. We don't even know if these are authentic photographs. Next. Oh, yeah, the recital. I have to wait to see if the video comes up, because that's so important to have white people sitting here saying all this and describing you. The way she talked about O.J. Simpson, she says he had a very bizarre look in his eyes, reckless eyeballing. It was very far away look. It wasn't like O.J. just walking into a place and being, hey, I'm here, and, kind of self-assured type of attitude. It was more of a glazed over, frightening, dark eyes. This sort of description of O.J. Simpson and black people in general is so common. Remember the way they described Michael Brown Jr.? Killed him and said, he was about to turn into the Incredible Hulk and looked like he rose to about 12 feet. Remember the way they described Rodney King in the beating? He said, oh my God, he was looking at me like, you're beating me, and his eyes were bulging out. But they have got every type of, when they got to shoot you 28 times, as Mr. Cochran has got, they got every sort of description. Mark Furman even has one. If you watch the ESPN documentary, it's the beginning of the second installment. He starts it off, and he's talking about the 1985 incident that he responded to at Rockingham. He goes out, and he says, O.J. Simpson was there, and he had a bat in his hand, and he had a vein, and it was bulging out of his forehead, and it was huge. It looked like a tree stump, and he had sweat rolling down his face. He was breathing hard. I said, put that bat down. And he said, he was breathing, and it's like... Are you talking about a grizzly bear? Is it Godzilla? Like, do we need elephant tranquilizers? Like, what is the man not? Let's see. Oh, and that The LA riots is mentioned so many times in this book. They come and find Sergeant Coon. Is that Officer Stacy Coon? He was one of the officers in the Rodney King beat. No. Not related to Stacy. Oh, they have to, every 5 seconds, have to try and, yes, please, can we stop bringing up the LA riots? Hate Rodney King. Rest in peace, Rodney King. Let's see. Detective takes the shoes to Semi-Valley. Detective Lang, you took the shoes home with you to Semi-Valley? Yes, took the shoes home to Semi-Valley. It comes up again. And even pause right there. Is that police procedure to take evidence from a double murder to your home in Semi-Valley? Now, when you can pause for dramatic effect, but I mean, really, like, come on, and then have the audacity to say they just tried to switch the attention from O.J. Simpson's guilt to a few little discrepancies in police conduct. Like, get out of it. Talk about mountain of evidence. It's a mountain of police misconduct in this case. Let's see. Oh, man. He says Cochran interspersed a series of questions about frequent visitors to Nicole's home, pointing out that Marcus Allen, the football star, seemed to be among the regular guests. He let linger the issue of what Allen was doing with Nicole. I'll let one linger. How about the fact that it's reported that Marcus Allen had a white Ford Bronco at the time? That might be one reason of interest, particularly if you have witnesses who say that they may have seen a white sport utility vehicle in the area. Not saying that Marcus Allen killed her at all, but if they did hang out and he also has a white Ford Bronco, that might mean something. If people are seeing an athletic black male hanging out in the area, maybe it was O.J. Simpson, maybe it was Marcus Allen. That might be one reason, other than just trying to sully this pure white woman and say that she's sleeping around with black males. Let's see. It was correct. Cochran wasn't asking about rape. It was as if he heard every argument made by Don Vinson. The prosecution's ignored jury consultant. The questions reinforced the jury's picture of Nicole as a slut who pursued men in general and craved black men in particular. I find something about that really demeaning and racist to the predominantly black female jurors. And again, you did have two white women on this jury and a non-white, non-black male, so I don't know how this would impact them, but anyway, I just find that really demeaning to just say that, oh yeah, we'll just keep, implying that this gold-digging white tramp just wanted to take all your black men away from you, and that'll be enough to free a black male that killed two white people. Like, are you serious? Like, come on. Jeffrey Toobin is the lowest of the, and while he's masturbating on Zoom and telling lies on Johnnie Cochran, like, come on. Let's see. Dirty. Look at the language. Just look at the language he uses. Lang. Let's see. Cochran sensed this prickly atmosphere and sought to exploit it. His suggestions on his second day of cross-examining Lang were even more outlandish, especially when he returned to his favorite project, dirtying up Nicole. What? Like, what kind of racist language is that? Like, I'm blackening up this white, like, and it goes to just asking about Faye Resnick. Did she live there? Yes or no? Isn't this the heifer that wrote a book about them doing drugs and lesbian activity? But I'm dirtying up the pure sanctity of a white. Jeff Toobin is something, man. Let's see. He says that there's no evidence that this killing had anything to do with drugs. Number one, listen to that 1993 911 call and see if you can even get through that without it having anything to do with drugs. Number two, the police decided, and everybody else, that O.J. Simpson was guilty very quickly. Nobody investigated other sources. So from the police, the LAPD prosecution standpoint, no, there is no other evidence. That would be the investigating body, and they didn't look for anybody else. It was OJ, and that was that. Let's see. Anything else? Any other notes? He mentions the migration of the Darden family and the Cochran family. We read that in Isabel Wilkins' book that is not horrendous. And he mentioned Port Chicago. Way back in 2010, we talked about the Port Chicago mutiny, where lots of black soldiers died, about 300. Explosion right here in this part of California during World War II. Great book, The Port Chicago Mutiny. Oh, it's a movie, too. It's a movie, too. You should check it out, all about racism. Let's see. And then he comes back to his favorite theme, Toobin's favorite project, talking about how dumb and ignorant black people are. Chris Darden was not, alas, an especially talented lawyer. Then why was he added to this trial in the first place? Especially when he gets fired so many times from the case. Like, why was he added in the first place? Oh, we needed a black guy. Let's see. I have no idea what he means by the racial high ground. He says the defense had seized the racial high ground in the trial from the beginning. The strategy Shapiro advocated from practically day one was that Simpson was arrested and mistreated by the LAPD. I have no idea. I don't know what I've never even heard that used before, the racial high ground. Is there a racial low ground? Let's see. I told you, every black person associated with this case gets accused of being feverish. O.J. Simpson, right at the beginning, we're not going to bring it up that he's got a fetish for blonde-haired women. It happened to Ron Shipp, although Toobin doesn't write about that, but they did the same thing. Didn't you go to O.J. Simpson's house and use his jacuzzi just to bring white women? Didn't you? Like, everybody. Chris Darden, they still question him if he slept with Marsha Clark. Every black male, got accused of being feverish. That was associated with this case, except for Mr. Carl Douglas, I think. He might be the only one. And yes, I will stop there. I got in all the extras, and we still have time. We can get in our 3 pages. We'll finish out Chapter 15 so we can start fresh, Chapter 16, and then we'll see if anybody has extra comments. So we are finishing out Jeffrey Toobin's run of his life. Just Chapter 16. It's just 3 pages. So if folks have any last comments they want to get in, just make a quick note, and we will wrap up for this week. Whew, feel like we did a lot. All right. Context of White Supremacy, quick audio segment 2.
Darden never really recovered his composure. In repartee among the lawyers at the sidebar, he often revealed an astonishing lack of professionalism. One day early in the trial, Darden suggested that Ito should make an instruction clearer to a witness, then added, "I'm not criticizing you, Judge. You're my bud." A shocked Cochran interrupted. "It's not a question of him being your bud. I move to strike that." Sometimes Darden's humor misfired. On another occasion at the sidebar, he protested that Cochran has stepped on my shined Ferragamos. "You know, I think he should have to buy me another pair of Ferragamos." The ever-tolerant Ito answered, "Come on, guys." More seriously, Darden wore his emotions on his sleeve in front of the jury, alternately mugging and scowling to telegraph his reactions to the testimony. Sometimes he jangled his keys in irritation. Whatever the message Darden intended to send with these gestures, the jury only picked up on his nervousness and immaturity. Of course, the jury had been excused when Darden had his showdown with Ito on February 23rd, during Lang's cross-examination. After a third invitation to apologize and several more agonizing moments of silence, Darden broke down and offered the most grudging words of conciliation. "Your Honor," he said, "thank you for the opportunity to review the transcript of the sidebar. It appears that the court is correct, that perhaps my comments may have been or are somewhat inappropriate. I apologize to the court. I meant no disrespect." Ito, in contrast, was far more gracious than Darden had any right to expect. "Mr. Darden," the judge said, "I accept your apology. I apologize to you for my reaction as well. You and I have known each other for a number of years, and I know that your response was out of character, and I'll note it as such." Ito then invited the jury back to the courtroom, and Cochran resumed his cross-examination of Detective Lang. It didn't last long, however, because a new and even more bizarre crisis erupted. the star of Johnnie Cochran's opening statement, Rosa Lopez, the maid in the house next door to O.J.'s, was threatening to return to her native El Salvador. Chapter 16. I can't be here, Your Honor. In her opening statement, Marcia Clark had surprised Johnnie Cochran by declaring so emphatically that the murders had occurred at precisely 10:15 p.m. Talking with his colleagues on the defense team, Cochran learned from investigator Bill Pavlik that he had a witness who said she saw Simpson's Bronco outside his house at 10:15 p.m. That was Rosa Lopez, the maid at 348 North Rockingham, next door to O.J.'s house. Responding to Clark in his own opening statement, Cochran leaned heavily on Lopez's expected testimony, though he himself had never spoken to Lopez. Cochran made the point repeatedly that if the murder took place at 10:15 and the Bronco was still at Rockingham at 10:15, O.J. could not have done it. No one was more surprised to hear this than Rosa Lopez. From her base with the Salinger family just south of Simpson's estate, the 57-year-old maid followed the case closely on television, and even told several friends and family members in Los Angeles of her memories of the night in question. What Lopez told them, however, was that she had seen the Bronco at around 10 o'clock p.m., not 10:15. When Cochran said her name in his opening on January 25th, reporters quickly learned where she lived and began staking out her home. That was nerve-wracking enough for Lopez, but it was the disparity between her memories and Cochran's characterization of them that caused her real dread. As she well knew, a 10 o'clock sighting was neutral at best and incriminating at worst for O.J., because the murder scene was only a 5-minute drive from his house. Lopez had told several other maids in the neighborhood that she remembered seeing the Bronco at 10 o'clock. Word began circulating in the neighborhood that Rosa was lying, or had been paid off, or was otherwise enthralled to the defense camp. Lopez had also told her daughter, who lived in the Los Feliz neighborhood of Los Angeles, about seeing O.J.'s car at 10 o'clock. The reporters, the rumors, the scolding looks from her friends and family, they all combined to turn her misery to panic. The defense lawyers learned of Lopez's dismay, and as they did so often when confronted with a delicate task, turned to investigator Pat McKenna. Outgoing and friendly, McKenna was the obvious choice to mollify Lopez and keep her from fleeing before she could testify. He did what he could. McKenna and Cochran arranged for Lopez to have her own lawyer. Unappeased, Lopez quit her job with the Salingers on February 10th and went into hiding with her daughter in Los Feliz. The press found her there, and she called McKenna to help her escape. The next day, McKenna picked her up and led a fleet of local television vans on a brief 80-mile-per-hour chase through the streets of Los Angeles until he lost them. Still, Lopez fretted. A few days later, she disappeared altogether. She spent the night of Wednesday, February 22nd, in her car, and then drove aimlessly until she wound up in New Mexico. From there she called her lawyer, who on Cochran's behalf begged her to return. She agreed to fly back to L.A., but only, she said, for a single day. She would come to court on Friday, February 24th, but she vowed to leave for her native El Salvador the following morning. After nearly 30 years in the United States, she had decided to leave tomorrow. Lopez's flight from New Mexico landed in Los Angeles at 1:30 a.m. on February 24th. And when she appeared in court at 9 o'clock that morning, she looked haggard and bewildered. Seated in the back row of the courtroom, waiting to be called to the witness stand, she wore a purple velour jumpsuit and a dazed expression. Born and raised in rural El Salvador, Rosa Lopez led a life of extraordinary hardship until she came to the United States. One of 10 children, she dropped out of school at age 9 to help her parents harvest their small crop of corn, beans, and rice. She married young and had 7 children, but only 4 survived childbirth. 2 more died in the course of her country's long civil war, a 15-year-old daughter who was kidnapped and killed, and a son, a government pilot whose helicopter was shot down by guerrillas. The 2 survivors came with her to Los Angeles, where she had worked as a maid for about 30 years. Rosa Lopez brought a survivor's instincts to the witness stand in the Simpson case, as well as a considerable reservoir of street smarts. When Ito called Lopez to the witness stand, she revealed a quirky stage presence. Ito had called in a Spanish interpreter, but Lopez obviously understood all the English that was spoken around her. The purpose of the hearing this day was to allow Ito to decide whether he was going to interrupt the prosecution's case and allow Lopez to testify. Was she actually going to leave for El Salvador the following day? And if so, was she important enough for the defense to be allowed to call her as a witness out of the usual order? "Why were you living in another state over the course of the last several days?" Cochran asked Lopez during direct examination, which lasted only about 10 minutes. "Because the reporters won't leave me alone. I'm tired of looking at them. They have been harassing me." Lopez's style was cryptic, dismissive, and oddly grand. Lopez said she had reservations to fly to San Salvador on Saturday and hoped to be on her way. Rising to cross-examine, Darden first made sure of one point that Cochran had already covered. Lopez had said she had a reservation, but no ticket for the February 25th flight to San Salvador on TACA Airlines. "You just made the reservation, didn't you?" "Yes." "You made that today?" "Yes." "Prior to coming to court this morning?" "Yes." At that moment, Sherry Lewis, a prosecutor who was sitting next to Darden at their table, rose to go to the telephone in the courtroom. What she was doing was obvious, checking to see if Lopez really had made the reservation. Moments later, Darden had his answer. "Miss Lopez," he said, "we just called the airline. They don't show a reservation for you. Can you explain to the court why it is that you just told us you have a reservation?" No matter how many times she was contradicted by the facts, and this was the first of many, Lopez was never rattled. She serenely adjusted her story, but never her supercilious demeanor. "Because I am going to reserve it, sir. As soon as I leave here, I will buy my ticket and I will leave. If you want to, the cameras can follow me." Darden pursued her. "You lied to us, didn't you? Yes or no?" Because the agencies are closed. They open at 10 o'clock in the morning, and I was brought here very early, sir." "You don't have any plans to leave Los Angeles at all, do you?" Suddenly Lopez answered in English. "Of course, sir. My bags are packed. Everything is ready." And so it went, for hour after hour. Lopez remained unflappable, even as her story crumbled around her. It turned out she had bought a round-trip ticket to El Salvador a few weeks earlier. She had looked into receiving unemployment benefits, not the act of someone planning to leave the United States permanently. She said she was anxious to see her ill sister in El Salvador, but she then admitted that they hadn't spoken in many weeks. The exchanges between Darden and Lopez sometimes had a surreal quality. "You've been here 27 years, correct?" Darden asked. "I came in 69. You figure it out." "Okay. Why don't you tell me how long you've been here?" "Let's say 34 years. Even Lopez's supposed loathing for the press seemed questionable. She had actually given several television interviews, including one with a Spanish-language station just a week earlier, when she had said nothing about wanting to flee the country. During one break in the testimony as she was leaving the courtroom, Lopez stopped to chat with Kristen Jeanette Myers, a reporter covering the trial for Court TV. Darden asked Lopez if she said, "I love you on TV," to Jeanette Myers. "Yes, because I see her on TV." "You weren't terrified of that TV reporter, were you?" No, because she doesn't have a camera in front of my face. At the end of Lopez's long day of testimony, Ito gave the defense a break. He conceded that Lopez had contradicted herself any number of times, but he thought she was sincere in her determination to leave the country. Based on Cochran's representation that she would say she saw the Bronco at 10:15 p.m. on June 12th, Ito thought she was important enough to delay the trial. It was already after 5 o'clock p.m., but Ito ordered the bailiffs to bring the jurors from their hotel to the courtroom. Ito was ready to sit until midnight, if necessary. At 5:49 p.m., Marcia Clark stood at the podium, and her voice husky with emotion made a request. I have informed the court that I cannot be present tonight because I do have to take care of my children, and I don't have anyone who can do that for me. And I do not want proceedings to go before a jury when I can't be here. She said she had thought that Ito was going to order Lopez's testimony for Monday, not this very day. Nearly crying, Clark added, I can't be here, Your Honor. The situation placed Ito, in effect, squarely between two women, Rosa Lopez, who said she was planning on leaving the country the following day, and Marcia Clark, who had to care for her children. Ito backed Clark, putting off Lopez's testimony until Monday and betting that the maid could add one more weekend to the decades she had already lived in the United States. The judge called Lopez to the podium where the lawyers usually held forth. Ito said he would put her up in a hotel for the weekend. Elbows propped on the podium, Lopez wailed in English, I don't want to be here any longer. All these reporters have destroyed my life. Miss Lopez, the judge continued solicitously, the planes fly, as you know, to El Salvador on a regular basis. I will start your case, your testimony in front of the jury, the first thing we do with the jury Monday at 9 o'clock. Suddenly, almost coquettish, Lopez said to the judge, I will do it for you, Your Honor.
Context of White Supremacy. Told you it'd be very short so that we can pick up on chapter 16 next week. I doubt we will have as much supplementary material next week, but that N-word moment was kind of a rich source for lots of extra supplementary material. There will be a few of those moments as we proceed. I can definitely tell. Mark Furman is quite a few of those. Mark Furman is one. Matter of fact, he has several because he testifies twice, so he has two of those. Rosa Lopez is a huge one because Jeffrey Toobin is such a liar. And it's like institutional lying. Because of how the FX series does, but Rosa Lopez, that's going to probably be another one. The gloves, that'll be a huge one. It's a bunch. We'll have to slow down to get extra material so that people can get a deeper appreciation for more of the aspects of what happened in this case. But hopefully it is constructive. We've had a number of folks who reported that they actually have changed their opinion about O.J. Simpson's guilt as a result of listening to the book club, which was not even, in my thought process at all. I thought O.J. Simpson was guilty myself when we started all this. So it has been wild and hopefully informative. I mean, you can learn racial showcasing, sexual intercourse with white. If anything, this should be, no sex with white people. Anything could happen. You could come home and find yourself accused of a double murder. No sex with white people. But there's so much you can learn about this case. Words. How do you respond? So much to learn about the system of white supremacy racism. We had commentary, one of our investors, he wrote in, let's see, the link you provided to the complete Nicole 911 tapes seems to give a less damaging portrait of OJ. That's what I said. Listen for yourself. Come to your own conclusions. Chapter 15, a dirty, filthy word. Catherine, I forgot. We can even get into extra audio because I forgot so much supplement. Catherine Bowe, she is an alien from another planet. There seems to be no shortage of goofy white people in L.A. Cato Kalin, Faye Resnick, Jill Shively. What is also astounding is that all their goofiness, it does not seem to impair their ability to lead seemingly comfortable lives. The whole Brown family, freeloading nobodies, the benefits of being white. Amen. Number 2, Darden rose to Cochran. Is he the only lawyer that knows how to try a case? Seems like a very revealing Freudian slip. Number 3, Cochrans were no aristocrats and the Dardens no paupers, but still the difference between them was class. A common trope of suspected racists, all black people are in the same class, victims of racism, white supremacy. Absolutely. Number 4, the formative experience of Darden's college years came from his membership in the Alpha Psi Phi Alpha fraternity. This may be an honest mistake, but he has Alpha Psi Alpha. It is Alpha Phi Alpha. Could be a little tackiness there. Number 5, Chris Darden was not, alas, an especially talented trial lawyer. He had tried relatively few cases. This is such a common experience of non-white victims in the workplace. Lack of proper training by suspected racists and then get blamed for being incompetent. Workplace racism tomorrow. Number 6, Darden seethed to see O.J. Simpson, who had done precisely nothing for his fellow African Americans over the course of his life, capitalizing on his race. Darden, we are not running around or talking about or seeking to introduce to the jury the notion that this defendant has a fetish for blonde-haired white women. Darden, astonishing lack of professionalism, he protested that Cochran has stepped on my Sean Ferragamos. You know, I think he should buy me another pair. Racist suspects are incredibly skilled in engineering conflicts between non-white victims. Darden's histrionic behavior towards Cochran may be an attempt to achieve a measure of white validation. Now that's interesting. I have to think about that. That is interesting. I know the feud between victims, Amy had talked about that before. That is definitely, because that became a big part of the drama of all this. Johnnie Cochran versus Christopher Darden every day. Now, I'm so glad he mentioned Catherine Bowe and her husband, Carl Colby, because they testified, and we didn't really get to hear very much detail about their testimony. Toobin just said that Catherine Bowe, she sounded like an alien and was kind of spacey on the stand, was kind of confusing, and maybe O.J. Simpson was a stalker. This is just a brief tidbit from Catherine Bowe and her husband, Carl Colby. They both appear that they'd be classified as white, just really quick, and then we'll see if anybody has any other comments.
During 1992 and 1993, did you live next door to Nicole Brown?
Yes, I did.
Directing your attention to the last week of April 1992, at about 11:30 p.m., did you see the defendant at that time?
Yes, I did.
And where were you when you saw the defendant?
I was in my upstairs bedroom.
Okay. And where was the defendant when you saw him?
He was on the sidewalk below.
What did you see the defendant do?
I saw him walking around on the sidewalk, walking from Shetland up Gretna Green, slowly.
How long did the man remain on the sidewalk? The man you identified as the defendant?
All the time that my husband was downstairs.
Okay. How much time was that?
2 or 3 minutes.
Okay. Did your husband call 911?
Yes, he did.
What happened next?
I went to tell him that it was O.J.
My name is Carl Colby.
What caused you to call 911?
Well, it was an evening, approximately 10:30 or 11 o'clock at night, and it's it's a residential neighborhood, very quiet. And sometimes before retiring, I look just go check the locks and look around downstairs, make sure the lights are off, things like that. And I happened to look outside, and I saw a man outside on the sidewalk.
And what was that man doing?
He was standing on the sidewalk looking at what apparently was the residence next door.
And what did you see the man do after you called 911?
He went back to the original position and looked at the residence and then left. After I'd made the call, I recognized him.
And who was that man?
It was Mr. Simpson. Well, I was embarrassed that I'd called 911 because I didn't feel that Mr. Simpson was a threat to me or to anyone else in our neighborhood.
911 emergency.
Context of white supremacy. Listen to the 911 call in its totality. It's about 17 minutes. But I thought that was important because they said he was outside on the sidewalk for approximately 2 to 3 minutes, and that was enough to warrant a 911 call. I don't know if that's walking while black, being on the sidewalk while black, but you had better keep it moving in Brentwood. Now, they did say it was 11 o'clock at night. I don't know if they got a curfew or what have you, but 2 to 3 minutes, you had better keep it moving. Now, I thought that was important. Mr. Colby, he even said he felt embarrassed, like, oh, my God, I've called the police on the juice. Like, oh, so disgraceful. I thought he was some random nigger into our area. But I thought it was important because for two reasons. One, if you're telling me O.J. Simpson is a serial abuser, he's a batterer, he's a stalker, he just cannot, he's fiendish, he's feverish, he can't let this white woman go. If that's the case, and him standing outside where his children live, and he has right, even after the divorce, to come and visit his children, if he can't even be standing outside more than 2 minutes without having people who apparently know him and then recognize, like, oh, darn, that's OJ, without them calling the police on him, how often is he going to be able to come over there and cut a fool and be in the bushes and lurking? And how, like, believable is that? The second reason I bring this up, this is a prosecution, or these two, both of them, Catherine and her husband, these are both prosecution witnesses. This is your case to tell me that OJ committed these murders. This is the best you have to offer? You're ridiculing your own witnesses as spacey and goofy? To say that O.J. Simpson was a controlled indignus. This is a total disgrace. And did one of these folks, like, let me hop on the defense for a minute, like, it's time to cross-examine? Let's ride. Did you see this man, this black man, out on the sidewalk? Did you see him doing any illegal activity? No. Did he have a knit cap? No. Did he have a pair of gloves? No. Did he have a butcher knife? No. Did he have a weapon? No. Did he have blood? No. Let's run through the whole gambit. Like, all of this. Was he plotting? Did you see him engaged in any criminal activity? He was standing on the sidewalk. That's what you came all this way. You got us in jury sequestration and everything to come and testify that you saw him seeing a black male stand on the sidewalk for 3 minutes was cause for you to call 911, and that's what you were called here to testify to. Is that right? No further questions. Controlled indignance from beginning to end. This is the mountain of evidence you have that O.J. Simpson committed these murders. What a disgrace. Did any other folks have comments? We miss anybody totally?
Yes, can I be heard?
Yes, sir.
I got a caller, victim from out of New Jersey. I had a question. So I haven't seen the OJ movie. Would you suggest that, because I've been struggling, because I never really wanted to look at it. So would you suggest, as we follow this book read, is that a must-see? Would you recommend that?
Are you talking about the FX series or?
Yes, the FX, to compare and contrast.
I mean, I said when we started this, like I was doing a Chris Darden. I shouldn't say Chris Darden. I was throwing a tantrum saying I did not want to watch it. I was furious about it. Now, I mean, it's white supremacy propaganda. I would say this. People watch a lot of television anyway, and people, are always looking for movies to watch and study racism. If you're reading this book, you're participating in the book club. I think generally, if you read a book, if they make a movie, you watch and do a comparison contrast. This will be a very informative, revealing contrast to read this and then look at the movie, particularly once you're more informed. So, oh my God, wait until like next week. But things like next week, I'd say it is, because it's just straight white supremacy. It's just lie on top of lie on top of lie. From the same episode, they have Robert Shapiro talking to his wife, and she says, "Did you know that 5 days before the murders, Nicole went to a battered woman's shelter?" That's a lie, but that's so quick because you just got to catch in the sense like, whoa. Nicole Brown Simpson allegedly called a battered woman's shelter, and even that is real dubious. But she didn't go to a battered woman's shelter. It's things like that it's rife with just lie after lie after lie. Rosa Lopez next week, lie after lie after lie, and then have the audacity to get to the end and say, well, we're not trying to encourage you, how to think. You can think your own way about if he's guilty or not. So all that to say, if you're going to read the book, it is a study in especially if you know more about the case. If you don't know about the case and you're just watching it, it's white supremacy propaganda, and it'll waste. It's long too. It's like 10 episodes. But I mean, if it's like a study, if you're going to study the O.J. Simpson case and go through the literature and do a serious critique, oh yeah, study in white supremacy.
Okay, so because I asked that question because now that I'm following the book read, I asked people who've seen the FX movie, and I said, what conclusion did you come to? And most people say it kind of leaves you questioning both sides. So this is what I got from one friend, but I don't think he's being totally honest because I told him about the book read. So that's why I asked. And I'm gonna close with this. It's real interesting. Darden versus Johnnie Cochran. It's classic. It reminds me, and you pointed this out very often, how CNN will always put another black person against another black person. It's a pattern. They do the same thing on Democracy Now! And other news outlets. So it's just a pattern of that kind of tacky. Putting black people against each other is, real strategic.
Minimize conflict. Let's see, make sure. Getting all the folks. People we missed totally who have a hand up, proceed.
Have you heard?
Yes, ma'am.
Can I be heard? Hi, so something that I noticed is that the way that Toobin talks about Ito is very racist. He implies that he uses a stereotype of like this effeminate, passive man. He keeps using gracious in there, and it's almost as if he's implying that Ito, this Asian man, is like, the passive, the passive then intermediate between these two black men arguing like at each other. That was just something I noticed. Yeah. Thank you.
Great point. The effeminate Asian male. I was going to tell people to pay attention to the racism directed at Judge Ito as we move through the text. In fact, reminded me that segment early in the book about Judge Ito running through the college dorm with yelling bonsai. There's no footnote for that. Like, no, you're going to have to give me a footnote for anything that is like dubious like that I can't go and verify for myself. I'm questioning all of that. Like, Jeffrey Toobin has lied repeatedly. Nope. Until you can give me a footnote or something else, particularly a claim like that, you have to get, and like, where's this source from? Did you talk to like a frat member and they said that they saw this behavior? Is this in a yearbook or something that like Coon Man style, that he has, you know, pictures of him with this outfit on yelling bonsai doing it? Like, come on. Let's see. Other folks that we missed totally.
Can I be heard?
Mo in Dallas. Yes, sir.
Thank you. I'll be quick. I noted that I believe her name was Denise Brown on the stand when she was speaking about OJ and his abusive nature. She mentioned that, like, at a dinner, he ended up grabbing Nicole Brown Simpson by her private area, and she was like unbothered or something like that. You know, she acted like it was a common thing. And just on a whim, I Googled O.J. Simpson and Donald Trump, and they do have pictures together. And I was thinking maybe he was influenced by someone that, you know, he wasn't necessarily brought up around to behave as such, if it truly did occur. Well, that's all I have. I'll mute my line.
Everybody loved O.J. Simpson. Much obliged, Mo in Dallas. Yeah, Denise Brown is another no-count white person in all of this. Get her. Like I said, I'm hoping the recital, I have to go back to look at the chronology to see where the recital video came in, because I mean, wow, we'll have to make sure that we get the recital video as we proceed. But Rosa Lopez coming up is really important too, especially if you watch the FX series. And that's why it's so powerful. If you're not very informed, you just watch television and that becomes your reference point for how you understand things. White supremacy. In fact, I'd say this is a sparkling illustration of master deceivers, where you have white people. One of the ways you do master deception, you don't just tell that lie today. You tell that lie in June of 1994. You stick to that lie in June of 1995. You stick to that lie in June of 2001. You stick to it in June 2016. January 21, 2021, you got your same lie intact. That is on display in even Jeff Toobin. Johnnie Cochran called him a nigger. He got it in the book in 1996, and then you bounce right back on it in 2016 in the FX series. Johnnie Cochran calls him a nigger, and everybody, ooh, great TV. Black people name calling each other. Ooh. Master deceivers, Jeff Toobin. Anybody heard? Thomas in New York.
Yes. Just wanted to note, still the prosecution has yet to prove any motive, show any motive for this or intent, which is what you need to win a case. Did you ever watch the video, Gus, of the event? When he went to his daughter's event before?
That's why I keep mentioning the recital. I don't know. Yeah. I've seen it. I just don't know if he's going to bring that up. If he's going to bring that up in the book, then I'm just going to wait until, because I'm not sure if this came up immediately at that point or if that came up a little bit later. But yeah, I have seen it though, to answer your question.
Well, I was just going to say to that tape, and I'm not trying to jump ahead, but I do remember that coming into play when they was talking about was OJ's knees hurting him because he picked his daughter up, and the defense said he grunted, you know, he couldn't perform these murders because of all his knee trauma playing football. So that's when that tape came into play, I believe, was at that moment. But the last comment I wanted to make specifically geared toward incompetence, and as it relates to Mr. Darden, and it appears to be a bit of incompetence as far as him putting the sister on the stand, and it appears that he didn't prep her first, which is very, I would imagine, I've worked at defense law firms. Generally, if they're going to trial, they bring in the witnesses and they kind of guide them through how they want them to answer the testimony, how they want to present the case and things like that. So, but then he also alluded to the fact that she had just got out of jail for drunken driving, and I'm thinking, maybe she was hungover, and I don't think he was that incompetent to not prep her first. You know, maybe she was in a hangover. She couldn't, you know, because she went right to getting to the points where he's trying to guide her to, so it doesn't look like he's asking that question. She just goes right to the to answering the question she's not supposed to answer, you know, until the question is presented in a way where her testimony doesn't disrespect whatever rules they had in place. I don't think that was him. I don't think that was his incompetence. I think that was her white incompetence. And I mean, I think
it could have been. You know, he said in the text himself that the jurors didn't believe her. They felt that she was biased, so she could have been trying to, you know, be aggressive and get ahead of, you know, what he had prepared her to do, or whatever the roadmap is supposed to be for how the question is supposed to go, and, you know, how she's supposed to respond and all of that. The lawyers are already supposed to know how they're going to answer these questions if they're calling the witness up. So maybe, who knows? I did want to say, I have to verify. I'm trying to wait on this one because I don't know. I haven't read this book, so I don't know if it's going to cop up. And really, we can end all of this just once I have a chance to go back and look at the date for when the recital video was played in the trial. But it appears Jeffrey Toobin doesn't mention the recital video at all. If that is the case, that is monster acts of deception. You can put that one right up. So I gave one, master deceivers. One thing you do, you stick to your lie. 25, if you pass it on to your children, you stick to the lie. Number 2, omission. Sometimes it's not necessarily you lie and say, oh yeah, Johnnie Cochran called Christopher Darden a nigger. Sometimes the lie will be omission. Now, you have all these white people to come in and say that O.J. Simpson was a beast and a savage and had veins bulging out of his eyeballs. At the recital, a video was produced. Whoa! Denise Brown, is that you kissing the defendant on the video right there? It is, yes. Oh, okay. Can you point out the bulging vein in his forehead for us? Is that... I know this is not 4K, but do you see the bulging vein? Did you avoid kissing the bulging vein? Are these some of your other white family members? It appears that some of them are also coming up and hugging Mr. Simpson. They also avoid the bulging vein in his head and his popping eyeballs. If Jeff Toobin wrote this here book to say that O.J. Simpson killed these white people and put this nonsense in about his behavior and how he looked at the recital and totally ignored, there was video. We don't have to hear anybody's interpretation about how he looked. Like that 911 call, you can listen for yourself. The video, you can look for yourself. And the prosecution got in trouble for that because the prosecution, it's the same thing. It would be the same thing. Jeff Toobin, he may have sat in court and watched this video and watched the prosecution get excoriated for not producing this video. You knew about this video, and this is what they call exculpatory evidence that would tend to suggest you are innocent of this crime, particularly if you're going to have people saying, oh, he looked like a savage. He was about to go kill someone right now. And then on the video, he's picking up his... even more importantly, he goes to pick up a child. Not Ronald Goldman. He goes to pick up a child, and he has a hitch. Looks like he might actually have some arthritis or some health issues. If you got a hitch where you got to pause noticeably to pick up a child, are you going to tell me you can kill two? Controlled indignance, beginning to end. We will wrap there. I think we got everybody, and even did bonus time. Our call in New Jersey, I guess, if you're... Did we get it? Yes, we did.
Yeah,
call in
I just wanted to add, too. If I'm not mistaken, that phone call when the gentleman called about O.J. being on the curb, because I always hear about he was stalking her. Is that the evidence, or was the evidence that was presented that he was outside stalking Nicole?
I do not recall. Now, I'm not an expert. I did not watch the trial, and I have not watched the entire trial, and I don't have a roster in front of me of all the witnesses, although that does exist. I just don't have it in front of me right now. But off top, I do not recall any other... they didn't testify. I don't recall anybody else who testified in court during the criminal trial that, yes, I saw O.J. Simpson stalk Nicole Brown Simpson. I do not remember any other witnesses other than those two.
Because people often bring that argument up. Okay, that's interesting.
Yes, it is. But yeah, I think Faye Resnick, because I was about to say she said he stalked her, but she didn't testify at the trial. And then, how credible do you think she is? But yeah, she didn't testify. So I would have to go back to double check to verify. I could be in error, but they might be the only two people who testified at the trial that O.J. Simpson stalked Nicole Brown Simpson. So that would mean his entire stalking of Nicole Brown Simpson lasted a whopping 3 minutes. That was it, sir?
That was it.
We will pick up next week, chapter 16. We are almost halfway done, which that also is fast. So many things I could say about the text. We are more than halfway through this book. Okay, we're picking up on chapter 16, and this book only has, let's verify, this book only has 23 chapters. We're on chapter 16 next week. It only has 23 chapters. We are only in February of the trial. This trial goes to October. Now, the same thing I did with Scale last week, and particularly because this week we went backwards. We didn't even go forward. We were in February, and then we went backwards to go back to get the N-word argument. That happened in January before the trial. I don't know why he went out of order chronologically there. I guess with the whole Darden meltdown thing, he wanted to give a different perspective on that. But we have gone from June, when the murders happened, to February, and it's taken us 15 chapters to get there. Now we will have 7, is that all? 7 chapters to get to the conclusion of the text. 8 chapters, sorry. 8 chapters to get to the conclusion of the text. June to February, that's roughly 8 months or so. And now we still have a whole 8 months of trial left. I had the suspicion he is probably going to skimp on a lot of detail on the trial, because even the FX series, the point where we are in the FX series, we're at the even halfway point. Like we are right at the end of 5, so we'd be halfway, and then you have another half to go. That seems a little bit more balanced. If there's any indication at all, he is going to leave out a whole lot, and it's probably going to be on the side of leaving out defense, because the FX series, they don't even show any of the defense witnesses. You only see the prosecution's case, and the defense cross-examination. That's the perspective that you have on the trial. You see zero defense, except one. You see one defense witness at the very end, and that's brief, and that's it, and they move on. I don't know how he's going to present or what information, but if it's any inkling, if he leaves out that recital video, wow, this is an extraordinarily deceptive, deliberately so, deceptive book, and way worse than Case. Like, it would have to replace Case. It would be that bad, like, because this is so significant, and you sat right there like you did. Like, this is just total white supremacy propaganda. You're just telling willful, deliberate lies on every page to confuse people, and then they made a big film about it. Like, Case would be bumped immediately. That's how bad it would be. Like, if that recital video is not there, man, immediately Case that Isabel Wilkerson is bumped down. I guess she'll have to be 3 now, but this might even, I would have to think, like, shouldn't this replace Dr. Africa if he's like did all this lying and things? Like, maybe Nutricide is no longer the worst book if Toobin has a book full of lies that has convinced a whole lot of people that O.J. Simpson committed a crime he did not. Might have to adjust our worst books of all time to include Jeffrey Toobin. We will see as we go. But either way, he's already told a lot of lies and should be worthy of consideration either way. With that, we'll be here tomorrow for Neutralizing Workplace Racism. I hope it has been constructive. I knew it was going to take more time to try to make sure we got people's commentary in, and then there's so many, extra sources. We could be reading extra books per day, but I thought with this section specifically, I thought it would be important to kind of pull in some of the extra sources about what happened, hoping it's constructive. Much obliged for folks tuning in. Hope it was worthy of your Thursday evening. Sobriety would be best under conditions of white supremacy. We will need, with all of the lies that we have to fight through, we will need our brain computer working well. In addition to being sober, let's hunker down. They said, I think 1 in 5 of the terrorists at the Capitol earlier this month were in the armed forces. Wow. They should make Veterans Day January 6th now. Anyway, that would be another reason to at least have pause when you're out and about, especially, like I've been saying, anybody that's rowdy, hostile, mouthing off in public about anything, really, masks, whatever it is, no verbal confrontations. Should be thinking these folks could be armed. Military service members might have a whole cadre of folks with them who are also armed. Safety first, minimal risks. That's what we should be thinking. Saw that security they had at the inauguration. Dangerous times. That's what we should be thinking when we are out and about. Be very aware of your surroundings and encourage folks that you care about and what have you. Be alert. This is no time to just be mindlessly dawdling about in public. Be very, very aware and vigilant about what's happening around you. If you got to go to work or whatever it is, something essential, you are sober, buckled, vigilant. If you are driving, you are not on the cell phone. As I said, we got to be very aware of what's happening around us. 2, we want to try to minimize as best we can contact with the Mark Furmans of the known universe. Can't totally eliminate, but I mean, at least we can be sober. We can be buckled up, not on our cell phone, just the small things that we can control to try to stay as safe as possible. All of that said, Creator, we ask that you help us remain patient with other black people, victims of white supremacy. We ask that you help us remain patient with ourselves. Remind us to demonstrate the highest levels of black self-respect at all times, in all places, each and every time we are in contact with another black person. It has been time. Replace white supremacy with justice immediately. Cow signing out. Thanks all for tuning in.
Nigga, you so brainwashed. I'm a victim, brother. No problem. You're a victim.
I'm a victim of 400 years of conditioning.
Shut up.
The man has programmed my conditioning. Even my conditioning has been conditioned.